right, hello everyone. This is a bit of a different showcase. This is the first How Live we do with pre-recorded sessions. We're having to face with the pandemic, so we're here in our jails, as you can see behind us. We've chucked something on the walls just to feel like we're home, but this is a very peculiar one. I've got Eric Rutis with me. Hello, Eric.
Hello, Marco. Hello, everyone.
Live from the Vermont jails. We're going to have a session about the upcoming war games. So it's going to be very specific about Matrix Games and what Matrix Games has in-house for 2021. So we've got Eric. That's why we've got Eric. He's our expert and historical memory of everything that happened since the very beginning. Eric, how's life? How's everything over there?
We're doing okay. We're hanging in there, Marco. Looking forward to 2021, and not just for the great war games we've got coming out, but yeah.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I agree. We're good. Yeah, hanging in there, and trying to do our best to keep the spirits high with what we can. Eric, you're right in saying that 2021 is going to be big for war games. I think it's going to be one of the best year for in recent history in terms of number of war games and number of releases we've got.
I have to agree with you on that, Marco. I think across a large part of what we consider the wargaming subgenres, we've got games coming out in 2021 that are going to be arguably right up there with the best in class historically. And I'm looking forward to going through them with you and with the developers as part of this event.
Can you give us a little bit of a highlight of what we're going to see today?
Sure. Well, I guess we're going to go through 4 games today. We'll start with WarPlan Pacific, which is a follow-on to WarPlan, a very successful grand strategy game by Alvaro Sousa. That was his first war game, which some may find hard to believe. And he is now following it up with a sequel that covers the entire Pacific theater, whereas the first one covered all of Europe and Western Asia and the Mediterranean. And it's shaping up really well. We're getting a lot of really good feedback. And I have to say, having played the game myself, I think that this is going to rank right up there with some of the best grand strategy games we've ever made. We've also got War in the East 2 coming out from 2x3 Games, Joel Billings and Gary Grigsby. I think everyone knows who those are, the kings of the monster game genre. And this is going to be, I think I can say this fairly, it's going to be the best monster war game we've ever made. It is, or at least again, arguably, it is right up there, and a major leap forward from War in the East 1. And we've got Decisive campaigns for the Ardennes coming out from Victor Reichers, who has been working through a series of innovative war games. He's gone through a lot of operational scale games, though he was gradually increasing the scope to bring it up to the high command level and added in some really innovative designs. This time he's going a little bit down in scope, and he's actually bringing us a much more detailed operational war game. In some respects, it reminds me in some ways of some of the old SSG games, but it has a lot of innovations that even take it in different directions. And I think as far as operational war gamers are concerned, this is going to be one of the best operational war games, certainly that I've played, that I've seen. And then we've got Flashpoint campaign Southern Storm. Now these guys have been actually working away like crazy, but not on the commercial side for the past few years. So a lot of fans of the Flashpoint campaign series who love the grand tactical style of war game, platoon scale units fighting out in a Cold War, World War III gone hot setting. They've been looking forward to the next installment. And Southern Storm looks at the southern part of the NATO West German front. And this has been in the works. And unfortunately, it's had to go on the back burner for a while just because of the pro and government work this team has had. They've been spending a lot of time working with some parts of the military on a professional version of Flashpoint campaigns. But they are back, and alongside the government work, they're now going to finish up Southern Storm and get that out with a lot of improvements over what Red Storm had to give Cold War wargamers and Grand Tactical wargamers a whole new title to play with, which I think is going to really impress them.
Yeah, I think you're right in saying that that it's Ardennes is going to be the first year where we have so we cover so many different genres and within the war game sector, and the products are really top notch, and they're all building on something that was existing, right? They're all kind of call them sequels some way. You're like producing to these directly, War
Right.
East and Flashpoint campaigns. Can you take us through a little bit of the a scope and how you're seeing these projects develop over the next few months before release?
Sure. Well, two very different projects. Let me start with War in the East 2. So, as our customers may or may not know, War in the East 1 was a long time in development. And after we released War in the East 1 and it was very successful, we planned on moving on to War in the West, which we did about 5 years later. That took about 5 years of development. But really, War in the East 2's development started almost at the same time as War in the West. We had a lot of ideas about what we wanted to do with War in the East that we weren't able to do with the original engine. Some of that was the limitations of the hardware of the day in terms of just the calculation times. Some of it was just the limitations of reasonable time, for how long we could keep it baking in the oven before we had to put it out. So we looked at everything again. The AI has had a complete overhaul, and it is a far better AI than what was in War in the West or War in the East. I'd argue it's Gary's best AI ever. We took another look at the air game. We had a very simplistic air game in War in the East 1, and we then went very realistic for War in the West in order to model the strategic bombing campaign. But for War in the East 2, we wanted something that combined the best of both worlds, that allowed players to have the ease of play that they had in the War in the East 1 campaign system without sacrificing any of the realism that was in the War in the West, and actually improving on it in some cases. So that new air operational group system and the whole interface for that is built into that. On the logistics side, we redid the entire logistics system. Some of the improvements from War in the West, like depots, are in there, but we also have now road systems. We have single and double railroads. We have railroad capacity. We have all kinds of stuff going on that wasn't going on before to make supplies realistic. When you look at some of the historical supply limitations that we were able to model partially, but not as well as we would like in War in the East 1, you read some of the campaign accounts in War in the East 2, that's all there. You're feeling the exact same pinch at the exact same places that the historical commanders had to deal with. And at the same time, we took a look at the weather system and made an entirely new, very realistic weather system to more properly cover the Eastern Front. It's a much better weather system than what we had in War in the East 1. We revisited the entire order of battle, all the TOEs and equipment, revisited the combat system, revisited the leader system, revisited the entire user interface to make it easier for players to access the information at their fingertips, and for when they need to use the power tools like the commander's report or the metrics that track things from turn to turn, we redid all those as well to make them better, easier to use, more powerful. The feedback from the testers has been fantastic on that one, and that has really been like a from the ground up. We tried to make it so that players of War in the East and War in the West would feel at home, that it would not be a completely foreign, experience from them from the perspective of not understanding the interface or the gameplay, but at the same time, everything's better. And then for Flashpoint campaigns, I mean, we were working on Southern Storm for quite a while before we started the pro part of the job and started working with the military. And the focus that was required to work with the military and meet their needs kept us very busy for a while. And obviously, some of that inspired some additional work in Southern Storm as well. But a large part of what we originally envisioned Southern Storm being was that it would take what we had built in Red Storm, which was a grand tactical game that also built in what we call the OTA loop, or the decision-making loop that determines how quickly a command structure can respond in battle, and that adjusts for the friction of battle and the casualties of battle. And that was one of the chief innovations of the Red Storm system, is that you have asynchronous turns. So you may have a command structure on one side that is allowed to give new orders to its units every 15 minutes. And on the other side, a heavily attrited command structure, one that has a great deal of interference from electronic warfare, might be only giving orders every 30 minutes. And you have to deal with that as a player. And part of that is you have some, things you can set up as standard operating procedures and settings, but to some degree, you just have to adapt with what happens to your command structure as the game goes on. So we wanted to build the NATO Southern Front, bring in more nations, provide a whole different set of scenarios and campaigns, and a different gameplay experience, because the terrain and the forces fighting were not the same from the north to the south, and also provide a new system for the AI. So again, the AI has gotten a lot of work in this, similar to War in the East 2. The combat system has gotten a lot of overhauls as well to address some of the issues, again, that mostly came down to where abstractions that were not ideal in Red Storm we could replace with more precise simulations under the hood as far as how combat unfolds. And a lot of this just is going to go into a commercial product that makes the Cold War gone hot at the grand tactical level more realistic than it's ever been.
You think that over time it's been sort of any more difficult to find developers that were willing to embark into such complex and articulated designs and creating these products? I mean, as we progress, I mean, there's always this thing, war gamers are old, and at some point, they're all going to disappear because the market's going to be there anymore. But effectively, that doesn't happen. It's still a sizable market with a lot of new people, new blood. Every year, there's new people buying these games, which is really cool. But on the other hand, it's harder and harder to find really the developers that are willing to work in these games. So, how do you see this going forward?
Well, there are two very good questions there. Let me tackle the second one first, which is the aging of the market. I mean, I think it is true that the original wargamers, if you look at wargaming as a hobby that kind of hit its stride with the first sort of board war games in the 60s, and then with the first computer war games in the 70s. If you look at the original wargamers, yes, they are aging. They're getting up there in years, and eventually that portion of the market will age out of the market. But there's new wargamers coming in. And we're seeing that also as we expand the market. One of the things, and this goes into the answer to your first question, I think it's always been hard to find wargame developers because there's a certain happy combination of skill with programming and a love and passion for history and a love and passion for strategy games that has to come together to make a really good wargame developer and designer. And it's something where it's hard to train or instill that in someone. They have to have it within themselves and they have to give it a try. But it's actually one of the best times, I think, to be a wargame developer. And it's actually, I think, good news for the wargame market in the sense that as we've reached out, as we've matured as a company and we've reached out and gotten wargames into more places, we've actually seen the market grow. And we've seen the ability of a good wargame to generate sales that can support development certainly at a production quality level, at a team size level that wasn't really possible in the past. So while I still think that a lot of war games start with, and always will start with, a passionate developer with a love of history and strategy games, I think there's room for teams that even, might work on other games too, to take a dip into the war game market, to give it a try, and to have a decent return on investment. I think the main thing is we're always looking. So for anyone out there who is thinking about being a war game developer, who has tinkered with war game development, drop us a line. We're always looking. A lot of the best war games that have ever been made started with one guy with a vision. And when you hook up with a good publisher, when you hook up with an experienced crew like what we have, then we can make that vision become a reality in many cases.
You're spot on, Eric. let's move into the gist of things. So the first game we're gonna present is WarPlan Pacific. So it's the first. It's the game that's the newest. That's got the newest developer. So it's going to be interesting to see what Alvaro has to say about it. And we'll move to present the other one. So back into this formation after the first presentation. So enjoy, everyone.
Hi, everybody, and hi, Alvaro. We're here with Alvaro Sousa, the designer of WarPlan.
How you doing?
So I want to introduce everyone who may not be familiar with it to WarPlan. WarPlan, in my opinion, is a great game, and a lot of people have described it as kind of a Panzer General went grand strategy. And while that's high praise, at the same time, I don't think it does it justice. And Alvaro, it was also your first Polish game, though you'd previously worked on the Strategic Command series. So I also want to congratulate you. Such a great game right out the gate. So in addition to being a great first war game, you've also been very responsive, very busy with updates for the community since release, which I think is also always excellent and a good indicator of success. Now, from my perspective, having played around with it, WarPlan looks great. It has an easy-to-use interface. It's very informative to the player. But it also has, and this is what I think really makes it stand out among some of the other grand strategy titles, it has a surprising depth of gameplay. And you've built in some very elegant mechanics to sort of bring that depth of gameplay in without overwhelming the player. Now, a lot of wargamers at first glance might look at this and think, well, it's kind of a beer and pretzels grand strategy game. Because of that ease of accessibility, it has that sort of easy to access, easy to play look, but there's actually a lot more to it. There's a lot a player can do to customize his nation. There's a lot a player can do to customize his forces and the game strategy as a whole to his liking while staying within that historical framework of World War II. So I think it strikes a really good balance of strategic decision making and some more detailed choices all the way down to the individual unit level. So I'm curious, I guess, to start with here, what were your inspirations for WarPlan?
Wow, that's a very big question. There's actually a bunch of little factors that were involved in this. My wife has been pushing me for 20 years to do it. And I sort of got lucky with a bunch of little factors. Like, as you said, I worked with Hubert and Bill at Pure Software, and they're just a bunch of great guys. I mean, they really got my foot in the door and got me to see that you can actually make money making war games. And I've been playing war games since I was 15 years old. And the way I learned war games was a friend of mine taught me Third Reich, and he taught me the hard way, which he basically taught me the game and then showed me where my mistakes were, but didn't tell me what the rules were. So that's how I learned. And it was pretty brutal. But after that, I'm like, this stuff. So I got into it. So I played pretty much every grand strategy game that you could play in the 80s and 90s. And so I picked up what people like, what people don't like. The other part of it was that my wife is a UX designer, a user experience designer. She has a master's degree in it. And she taught me a lot about interfaces, user experience, cognitive psychology, how to design things. She actually helped me design the interface for it. And then I also play poker. And that's really where a lot of the inspiration from it came from. Poker is a game of skill with luck and a lot of critical thinking, abstract thinking, and deep thinking. So I dove myself into trying to understand exactly what it is about game design. I researched a bunch of stuff, and I realized that depth to a game doesn't make a difference. What you're doing is more important than complexity. And so I went that approach for the game. Now, I be honest, I really rolled the dice on this because I created something that I'm like, I don't know if people are going to like it, if they're going to understand it, if it's too much, maybe, I don't know. But luckily, it was a huge success. I will admit it's more based on World in Flames and Panzer General. So that was my favorite World War II game growing up. So, I mean, all those factors inspired me to do it. And I actually enjoy it more than poker, doing game design. And I wanted to give people just really a really good board game, a really good computer game that acts like a board game.
That's awesome. Well, first, let me say thank you, Mrs. Sousa. And also, yeah, you've covered a lot of ground that's familiar to me too. Third Reich was my first grand strategy game as well. Also a fan of World in Flames, and now a fan of WarPlan. So let me ask you, when you look at, if you were to sort of think about an elevator pitch, if it were, just a brief summary that would explain to someone who hasn't played it before, where it fits compared to other games in the grand strategy war game genre, what do you think makes WarPlan stand out?
I think that you can take the elements of a complex board war game like World in Flames or SPI's European Theater of Operations and let the AI do all the hard work for you. So the player can focus completely on operational decisions, on strategic planning, and managing what he wants to do and planning it ahead of time. And it takes, it compared to some other war games, like for example, if you want to attack with 3 units to 1, you have to do about 8 clicks, 6 clicks. With mine, it's just basically 2. Select the unit, attack the enemy, and you can use another key to say, hey, select all these guys or hover these other guys to attack a bunch of other guys. You can set other units to do things automatically. The reinforcements are automatic. The technologies are automatic. Now, some players, they got a little bit hard to get used to it, but it turned out to be really good. I would often see people in the forums like, why can't I do this? Why doesn't this work? Why is he beating me? And they're like, wait a second, I'm going to try this next game. And so they try a different strategy, and they learn from that, and they just keep learning. And then I still play it. I'm the designer, and I figured I'd be burnt out by it, but I still play it with people online. And every game I play, I learn something new, and I want to try it. So that basically sums it up. So I think players will really, really enjoy the abstract nature of it, and then they could focus on being a real general instead of micromanaging things. And the rest just comes naturally.
I have to say that coincides with my experience with it as well.
Good.
I started out learning how to play it when I first played it and playing it at a fairly superficial level. And the more I scratched the surface, the more depth I found, the more strategies I wanted to try out, and the more mistakes I realized I'd made.
Yeah.
As time went by, I was like, oh, I could have done that differently, and that would have probably worked out better. And yeah, I'm still trying out new things with WarPlan and looking forward to trying out new ideas with WarPlan Pacific.
Have you played the multiplayer version, like where you play another person?
No, unfortunately, I'm still AI because of my schedule.
You have to do the multiplayer. That will give you the most enjoyment, and that's what people say is when you pit against another human and all the stuff, things they try to do or don't do. That's the biggest thing.
Oh, I concur. I hope to be able to do that soon.
Yeah.
So I guess we've talked about your inspirations and about where you think WarPlan does better. I guess one of the questions now I want to pivot a bit to the development of WarPlan versus WarPlan Pacific and talk a little bit about your experience. Once you made up your mind to work on WarPlan, the experience of developing that and how that process has evolved in the development of WarPlan Pacific, which is what we're here to talk about and focus on today.
Well, how can I put it? I guess I figured like I knew what a Model T was, and I tried to build a Ferrari. So for developing a game this large for a single person, it's as one review put it, it was a magnificent achievement. Getting all the ideas down, I had to relearn coding. I hadn't coded in 30 years, so I had to relearn how to do it. But trying to figure out all the game mechanics and then going through testing and seeing what works, and then going through WarPlan and having hundreds of players playing it and telling me what they don't like and like, and then taking all those elements and figure out what I can do better in WarPlan Pacific. And then the scope of that game and how it's a completely different game. You try to add elements. I try to add elements to it that are very organic in how they flow. So it isn't something mechanical to use, where people figure out a sequence to do things in games. Do this in this order for the most efficiency. That's not what I'm trying to do. So for WarPlan Pacific, I came up with a lot of ideas, and I actually retrofitted them back to WarPlan. As part of the naval system to add a little bit more flavor to it. But in the Pacific, we're in alpha testing. The alpha testers, they love the game. They think it's great. We added some new mechanics to it and changed some of the rules that I think will make it a really good game.
All right, so we talked a bit about the process and the inspirations, but there are some wargamers who aren't really as familiar with the grand strategy subgenre of wargaming, who haven't really dipped their toes into it. They've been focused more on the tactical or the operational scale. And grand strategy really is its own unique subgenre because it deals with a lot of things that aren't purely military in nature. And I want to give players who have not played WarPlan or who have not tried grand strategy games a better sense of really what all the decisions and systems in WarPlan are about. So thinking about things like, your national level production and logistics, your research, your diplomacy, your upgrades in other areas. And I wonder, take as much time as you'd like, Alvaro, but I wonder if you would walk us through sort of in those different areas that cover grand strategy, what can a player do in WarPlan?
Production-wise, well, actually, all the elements of the game, I focus on the most important aspects of the war. So, for example, in production, the two most important elements were steel production and oil production. So the game has a very simple element of production, which is production and oil. And the next most would be something like manpower. So you have all those three very basic elements. And I know that people are always saying they want oil and manpower, so I included them. So keep it simple, the three elements that you got to keep track of. Production really doesn't come into a problem for any side, but oil comes for a problem for the Axis. So they have to manage their oil. I often get a lot of complaints about players like, I'm running out of oil, and everybody else is like, you're building too many tanks or too many planes, you're doing too much. So they have to balance what they have with like a historical feel for the game. So we'll go all over all the aspects of land, air, and war. So in the land war, a lot of the tactical games, it's one unit click, one unit attack, one unit click, one unit attack. In WarPlan, people can attack with multiple units at the same time. They can also have air support. So you could designate air units to be manual, where they only fly when you want to fly them, to do what they call air strikes to reduce the supply and effectiveness of a unit. Or you could have them do ground support, direct ground support for units. So when you attack, you select 3, 4, 2 units, you attack one, and the airplane goes along with you in ground support. So it makes it a very easy element for them to do land combat, just like a board war game, without all the complexities. And the cool thing, one of the things I like about it, is that the units have operation points instead of just move and attack. So you can keep moving and keep attacking as long as you have operation points. And of course, tanks have the most operation points. Armored units are one of the most critical elements of the game, but it also leads into the second most important part, which is supply. I focused a lot on logistics and supply in the game. The players have what they call logistics pool, which they can build any kind of unit in any numbers that they want, but different specialized unit costs more logistics. So you have to really balance your force and balance what you want to make. You can make a little bit more of something, a little bit more of another, but it's still a balance that you have to do. With the logistic pool, you also follow supply. So if you build fancy units like armor and aircraft, and you're trying to do, let's say, D-Day, you got to worry about port supply. So the Allies have a problem because they have to manage their supply landing on the beaches and getting to Paris and getting beyond. And I tried to make, like I said, everything organic in the game, where now Antwerp is actually a very important port, just like it was in the real war. This same logistics and supply system also goes with North African theater, because the Italians and the Germans have a limited number of ports that they could draw supply from. And the further you are from ports, the less supply you get. So that North African theater feels realistic to people, and there's a seesaw that goes back and forth. And there's people trying to blockade. Even Malta has an effect on supply because the planes there can interrupt supply. That's basically how the land and air system work. The airplanes, you could do it on your own, or you could have them managed for you. With the naval system, I'd have to say that was the most difficult and probably the most unique system of the game. And I have to say that the beta testers, when WarPlan was coming out, really pushed the system hard because they wanted to do it well. And they gave me some really additional good ideas, which really put it over the edge. So I have to give them a round of applause on that. The naval system is a combination of text movement and area interaction. So it takes some of one game and some of another, and it puts it together. While the one thing that people complain about, there's no interception. There's no interception along the way. But this is based on the area that you're doing. Most naval combats were fought near a shore, not out in the open ocean. The only one I can think of that was fought in an open ocean was the hunting of the Bismarck, and that took half of the Royal Navy. So with naval units, you have 2 operation points, and you need at least one usually to do something. So you want to invade, you could like move once and invade, but you can't move like this long distance, just jump on somebody's capital. And as time has gone on, we've been adjusting the naval system because it's incredibly complex. Players can set fleets to intercept. So you could set a British fleet outside of Egypt and put it in what I call a fleet mode, which means it's patrolling and running around looking for the enemy. And if the enemy goes near you, you can intercept him before he gets to where he's going. There's naval retreat in that, where like if you damage them enough, they back up. So it's a large balance to make sure that when players move, they don't get ambushed completely. Like they move to an area and they get caught in a set of mechanics that the other player exploits and blows your fleet up or baits you. So it's very complicated to do it. We added 2 new elements to WarPlan Pacific that are, like I said, going to go back to WarPlan also. We had one issue where you allow air units to attack convoys, you allow air units to attack submarines, and carriers to attack submarines, and they were chasing down subs all the time. It's creating this micromanaged nightmare that nobody liked. So it took me actually quite a while, but I came up with a new game mechanic, and 3 of them actually that are being passed to Pacific, which is air units able to attack convoys, the sub hunter mission. Basically, it's not a real mission, but it's a way that you can use naval units, intuitively to help out escorts to defeat subs, and pursuit combat. We didn't have air units attacking convoys, but now we do. So we added another level to the escorts and combat. So in the escort convoy system, maximum of 10 escorts can be used to beat up a sub. No more than that. You can put extras, that's not a problem, but it won't do any good. And this is based on Michael Gannon's really good book, Black May, based on U-boat operations in the North Atlantic. But we had something special. So now with the air units able to attack convoys, now what I did is that you could add any number of escorts, and those escorts act kind of like as carrier escorts to damage the air unit. So now you have an element of decision. How many escorts you put in? You want to put 10, you want to put a few, you want to put more than 10 to defend like a certain convoy from air attacks, like the Arctic convoy. The sub-hunter element of it is that you basically take a carrier fleet or any destroyer fleets and you put them in a convoy lane. And what they do is they add a bonus to the escorts instead of just defeating the sub. So here you have you have 3 elements here, like if you're protecting against air, how many escorts you put in, and then how many sub-hunters that you put in the lane, also to help the escorts, but it doesn't help you to put in a sub-hunter without escort. So it's a very, you have to make a decision based on abstract mathematics and decision-making, where it isn't an exact sequence of events that you do to win. It allows you to use your critical thinking skills to figure out how you're going to defend a convoy.
You're shifting the probabilities.
Yeah, exactly. So, and this is where the poker part comes in. This is how poker works. So this is why these game mechanics works like that. Once I learned poker, it was my whole way of thinking about these games. The last element about pursuit combat, what was happening is players were chasing fleets all around the map and they were running away from them. So I added something new. Pursuit combat is that you can engage the enemy at the end of your naval move when you don't have operation point. It does a standard search, but all the damage is 50%, and it depends on the configurations. So if you have, let's say, person moving and a person at the location in fleet mode, an interception combat is fought by one interception fought first, and then a pursuit combat is fought. If the interception happens, the pursuit doesn't happen, and the interception combat is at full strength because the defender wants to fight you. He's actively looking for you to fight. But let's say you have the Bismarck running around the Atlantic that doesn't want to be found. Well, he's in what they call raider mode, which means I don't want to be found mode, and it lowers the chance of you finding him. But if you're in fleet mode, you could just do pursuit combat without worrying about interception. But let's turn over to the Pacific, and you have, Midway. You have your carrier force going in fleet mode. You have your transport force behind you in raider mode. They want to wait behind until you beat the American fleet. And the Americans try to come in, and let's say they want to get close and hammer the transport force. Well, they have to get past the carrier in fleet mode, intercepting them. So it should be really a complicated system, almost like chess, with abstract thinking. That I think is really going to make a good element to the game. We have it in beta testing in the Pacific and beta test and open beta in WarPlan, and the players really, really like it. The most interesting aspect of WarPlan Pacific that we added was Intel, which took me quite a while to develop. So I think players will this system. Currently in regular WarPlan, we did Fog of War completely different. Most games were like you don't see the units unless you get close to them. And in WarPlan, as you know, you see all the units. Some people complained, some people liked it. The system allows you to have an element of deception. So if you could take up, for example, a bunch of beat up units, put them on the French coast, and the Allies don't know any better what they are. They have to actually attack them and look for them. But in WarPlan Pacific, we went one further. So the naval units are invisible if they are not within a reasonable, what they call detection level range. So whenever you have your own controlled land, you have basically spotters, coast watchers, seaborne airplane that look out for the enemy, right? So within a distance, they could see, oh, there's a fleet there. They don't know what it is, but there's a fleet there. But once you're beyond that distance, you don't see the enemy. So we introduced Intel. So Intel has an interesting dynamic that you don't know if your code is cracked. So you gain Intel points every turn, and of course the Allies will have a lot more than the Japanese. And you have abilities that you can do, like try to break the opponent's code, try to do increasing detection levels in an area so you can get an idea of what the fleets are. You can recode your encryption to reset it. Mm-hmm. So how this works along is that the player has to start making estimations and guesses. Like if it's the Japanese, you're basically going to be playing defensive because you can't outproduce the Allies in intelligence. So you'll have to time and build up points to recode your encryption so they have a harder time understanding where your forces are. And as the Allies, you want a time trying to crack their codes and doing a scan in their areas to find out where they are. So the Japanese, it's this mid-42, what are they doing? Do they have their fleet at Rabaul? Do they have their fleet at Truk? Do they have their fleet at Singapore? Mm-hmm. They're going for the Aleutians. You don't know. You use intelligence points to scan ports, scan an area, scan your own land nearby. You see a fleet, what is it? And you start picking up signals. Like normally it says enemy fleet unknown. But you do the scan and you get different levels, and it might say we're spotting 2 ships, or we're spotting 2 capital ships, or we're spotting 2 carriers or a transport task force. And it's going to be I think a very interesting element to the game, where it only adds to the level of deception in the Fog of War game.
Yeah, it really sounds great, honestly.
We also added 2 other units to WarPlan Pacific: the light carrier and the patrol craft. And the patrol craft are basically, think of smaller vessels like PT boats to coastal ships. There's no actual designation for the size, but they're all smaller than destroyers. So patrol groups are now destroyer groups. And then the CVLs are the smaller aircraft carriers. And so why do we add CVLs? Because every capital ship in WarPlan Pacific is individual. WarPlan Europe, it was about 2 capital ships per county. It was appropriate for the game. But in Pacific, if I made like WarPlan, I think the testers would beat me up. I asked them, I said, do you want double ships or single ships? They're like, single ships. And they were demanding it. I was going to put it in anyways, but I wanted to ask their opinion. So people are going to get to see the Yamato sink, the Enterprise, Intrepid, any of the big battles, the Iowa. They're going to get to play with all of them. Yes, so in WarPlan, we had land specializations. In this one, we have air specializations and naval specializations. Mm-hmm. So like you could specialize a cruiser group to be a CLA, an anti-aircraft cruiser group, or you could add special, high research better, or we're more elite, or even the Japanese have a kamikaze specialization. So I think that summons up all the key elements. I didn't miss any.
Well, I've got to say, I think that players got a sense of what I was talking about from your explanations of the combination of depth and also some elegant design. I mean, just talking through some of the changes, the naval gameplay, and from the player's standpoint, this comes down to, once you understand the functions, you're switching between a few modes and you're managing your operation points, but the depth of the gameplay you get out of that and the possible combined operations that you can do, the possibilities become very close to precisely exact. You can cover pretty much every operation they actually did. One question I think which we didn't cover was on and I know you mentioned it briefly, but I know if you want to stick to the more historical track, mm-hmm. You're going to play without the diplomacy. But yes. You do have a diplomacy system, and there is also a research system.
Yes.
And I just wanted to cover for players who are interested in that side of, playing the what ifs. And I know one of the things I actually like about WarPlan is that the research system doesn't let you go totally off the rails, but it is there, and it is there for you to still, exert influence on prioritization on what you want, which path you want to go down first. And could you just touch on those a bit more for the folks who are more into the what ifs?
Yes, the research system. Yes, you are exactly right in what you said. What I want to do, give players a little bit of an option to advance in some areas, but not overdo it to take a huge advantage on players. So maybe they might be a year ahead in one category, but a year behind in another category. I also tried to give options for every unit so they wouldn't be stuck. So that way they could switch. And I'll give a very good example. Like perhaps early in the wars, the Axis, you want to take one type of technology called assault for the infantry, but then later on in the war, you want to switch to anti-tank technology for the unit. And you could flip it in the unit itself, and it basically represents a change in structure, more anti-tank guns, more assault guns, more defensive positioning.
You're redoing your TO&E and your doctrines, yeah.
Exactly, redoing your TO&E and your doctrines. That's exactly correct. You could do the same thing for aircraft. And there's little special rules that go along with it. Like for aircraft, they lose a little bit of experience, like a fighter pilot learning a new type of fighter. The naval units have even their own type of technology. And an interesting part of Pacific is that we added little itty bitty, I guess what they call immersive features based on technology. Like, for example, you could have warships in the battleships, or you could have heavy warships in the battleships. And you could already guess by those two titles what that represents. The warships would mean that the battleships are World War I older warships. And there actually is an element over there that they use less oil than the heavy warships, which are World War II type of warships. So example of a World War I type of warship would be the Congo or the Nevada, while a World War II type of battleship would be the Yamato or the Iowa, the newer ones that were built. Because as you know, they were using a lot of World War I battleships. Yeah. So these little details, and we also have, like, for example, bottom ships that now can't be moved out of port until they're fully repaired. These are little immersive things. So the research adds to that. One thing we did is, because I always like improving the game, is I took two research elements and combined them into one. So we had two elements about convoy escorts and air units attacking submarines, and we put them into one single technology called just anti-submarine warfare. So now planes and convoys use the same thing. We also added invasion technology, which what it means is that already the Japanese and Americans are at a decent level, but it makes it a little bit harder to invade. And once we go to WarPlan 2, that'll be part of the element of that. Once we design that game. So yeah, that's how the research works, and it's mathematically based, so people can't get too far ahead. You have a wide range of choices. I think aircrafts have 4 different choices with what they can do. Navals have 4 different choices. It's people are gonna like it. They're really gonna like it. It's a good mixed system.
And then on the diplomacy side, which I think lets you go a little further off the rails, and this is a little more of a what-if system, but yeah, it still requires the player, I think, to really, if they want to swing something in a way that it didn't go historically, they still have to really focus their efforts diplomatically pretty strongly on it. And I guess this is really for the what-ifs, for the players who really like to explore an alternate World War II, right?
Right. It is for the what-ifs. For the European game, I highly don't recommend it because there's too many little things that are aligned correctly, and getting one country or another that's big would just throw off the game. But how there are other different kind of players, and you want to see if they can conquer the map and get Spain and Turkey on their side, or activate the United States early, whatever they want to do. So it's there to explore. For the Pacific, there's almost no diplomacy because everybody's pretty much at war except for the Soviets.
All right. Well, looking back on your experiences to date, and I guess this is where we'll close. And I hope everyone's gotten a pretty good sense at this point of what WarPlan's like and what the upcoming WarPlan Pacific is going to add to the mix. And personally, I'm looking forward to it a lot. But if you were talking to someone like yourself not too long ago, who was either thinking about, making a war game, getting into the war game development or design, Based on your experience with your first game and now going on to your second, what would be your advice?
My advice would be this. First off, we're going to start with marketing. You can do marketing on your own, or you can get a really good publisher like Matrix Slytherin. I was very fortunate to find you guys.
Thank you.
It takes a lot of work to market a game, a lot of work. And the value of a publisher is immense. They support you, and you can see the difference in sales. People don't realize how difficult that is. You should spend a lot of your time on working on your game and let other people do some other parts. Now, as for, let's go to coding. The most important part about coding, and I was very fortunate because I have a friend that is a computer programmer. He's been doing it for more than a decade. So he's an expert at it. So we traded skills. I taught him poker. He taught me computer coding. But the most important element about coding is to realize that processors are unbelievably fast right now, and that you should mostly focus on making your code readable, because I learned that experience firsthand. When making WarPlan, I had to transition from thinking of a 1980s procedural way to program to object-oriented, and I also learned Unity engine. Took me a lot of man hours. So my code is not great, so it actually takes me longer to edit it. So when you are coding, learn proper coding procedures, data structures, how to organize your data better. Make sure that your code is in a way that's very, very easy to use. That way, you might save some time. Like if you just do it as you go, you might save some time early, but it'll cost you a lot of time later when you got to change code. If you do the work up front, you'll have an easy time changing code later. Now, the next would be user experience. Read some books, watch some videos on interfaces, cognitive psychology, how to build your game so the user has a very easy time to use it. And that is the most important part. And UX, user experience for computer games, is actually slightly different than applications. The applications, you want to make it as efficient as possible. But in a computer game, you need some element of doing, like just little things that you want players to do so they feel like they're actually working for what they're doing. I would say, yeah, that about covers it. Hire out some of your work. You can't do everything. Hire out artists, hire out composers if you need to. That's pretty much it. I think and start small. That's the last thing. Start small. If you start what I did, you'll be working on that thing forever. So it took me 6,000 man hours to code WarPlan and to come up with all the concepts. And that's from the very day I started learning Unity and relearned how to code to the day that it went on sale on Matrix. So start small with a small game, practice that, build up so you build up good practices for coding, for data implementation, for understanding how sound and game engine works. And then you can build up to larger and larger games.
Thanks, Alvaro. That is all very sound advice. And any closing thoughts you want to add on? Anything we've missed before we bring this to a wrap?
Yes, I hope that you enjoy the new game. That's what I got to say. I always try to. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so I listen to my players and I listen to my users. And I have to say the players have been absolutely fantastic in their feedback. They've given me great ideas. Some of them developed scenarios. They've been really great on the forums, and I appreciate everything they have contributed to the game and all the ideas they come up with. And even if I don't agree with your idea, or I don't think it's good for WarPlan, it still goes on my list.
I agree. Our community is one of our greatest assets.
Oh yeah, no, the guys are all fantastic. They're all fantastic. I appreciate every single one of them.
We do too. Well, thank you for joining us today, Alvaro.
Thank you for the
We're
interview.
looking forward to working with you to get WarPlan Pacific ready for release in 2021, and wish you all the greatest success with it.
Thank you very much. You have a great day.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
All right, that was good. That was very good. I think the chat is quite enlightening. I think the overall idea of having someone so passionate about this project and at the same time listening to the crowd out there to implement changes and do things in a different way is super good. So thanks Alvaro for shedding some light on the project. And as you know, you can already subscribe to the beta of the product. Make sure that you do that if you want to be part of the testing team. We need more people. These projects need a lot of people to improve. So make sure that you visit the product page, wishlist the game, and subscribe to the beta.
This is
on to the next one. Yeah, sorry, go on, Eric. Yeah.
Sorry, Marco. This is one of the keys to success to any of these war games is the engagement with the community. And all these developers have done a great job at that. But I just wanted to call out Alvaro for being first time, war game developer. He's been fantastic in terms of his follow-up with the community.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. And another good example of that is the one coming up next. I can't stop saying good things about Vic. Vic has gone from doing fantasy sandbox war games to World War II to sci-fi 4X, changing subject all the time. VR designs and Vic in particular, he's got a creative mind, doesn't he?
Yeah, Vic has a very broad range, and it also goes to show that when you are able to make a historical war game, you can also make other kinds of games. And I mean, that goes back and forth between both genres. Strategy, to some degree, is strategy. And I think Vic has sort of exemplified that, starting with advanced tactics and people's tactics, going through historical World War II games, going to Shadow Empires, and now back to World War II.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like Vic keeps writing things on bits of paper and then executes and goes back, and sometimes it's interesting to see how these developers work, their practice. It's really interesting.
And if you're a historical wargaming fan and you're here for the historical war games and familiar with Vic's work and you haven't tried Shadow Empires, please give it a try. There's a lot of great strategy in that game.
No, absolutely. All right, so let's move to the next one then. This is Decisive Campaigns 4 Ardennes Offensive. This is a joint effort between Vic and one of the fellow guys coming from the Decisive Campaign community. So this is a good example of how someone from the community can become a real protagonist in the development of a war game. And we'll be right back.
Welcome, Vic. It is great to chat with you again. And you and I do go back a ways. We started working together back with Advanced Tactics, which was your first game for Matrix Games, and continued on through some of the early Decisive Campaigns games. And while we're not working on this project together, I have to say I've been very impressed with your recent work, as well as what's coming up. We're going to talk about today, which is Decisive Campaigns, the Ardennes Offensive. And I'm glad we're going to have this chance to talk about this upcoming game with our audience as well. So I'm going to start with a brief summary of where you've been, and then we're going to talk about where you're going. Sure. Decisive Campaigns Ardennes Offensive is the fourth game in the Decisive Campaigns series of war games. And you've explored the campaigns of the early Blitzkrieg, the first 2 years of the Eastern Front. And looking back at these games, I think it can be fairly said that you've been recognized as an innovator in game design and development. And that shows in your last 2 published games and also the very positive reviews they've garnered among wargamers. And Decisive Campaigns Barbarossa, which was your second to last game, explored the challenging priorities and the ethical conflicts of high command on the Eastern Front, adding a level of role-playing and immersiveness to computer wargames that I believe will continue to influence other designers for years to come. And then Shadow Empire, which is currently available on Matrix Games and should be released on Steam, I believe the day this interview airs, also blends different game elements from wargaming, 4X gaming, procedural content generation, and role-playing games. And it creates a very immersive and very replayable post-apocalyptic, science fiction game where it really feels like all of your decisions matter as far as the destiny of the people you lead. So before we get into the details of the upcoming Ardennes Offensive, could you please speak a bit about the development and design journey that you've been on, through the previous Decisive Campaigns titles and Shadow Empire.
Oh, hi there, Eric. That was a long intro.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. As you already mentioned, we go back a long way. I joined Matrix around 2004. And that was Advanced Tactics. And I think 2009 or 2010 was probably the first Decisive Campaigns title, which rolled directly out of a desire to do something more historical, because Advanced Tactics was very procedural and, in a sense, very generic. So I wanted to have the nitty-gritty of the feel of real history, and the 16th Panzer Division in the hex. It's supposed to be with real equipment and not something called light or medium tanks. And this desire to work on real history, to simulate a real history, it's sort of a red line in the last 15, 20 years I did video game development. I always go either to, I need to do some history, or I go to, oh my God, I really need, the freedom of procedural design. I want to be surprised myself. I want to press the button start and have a new planet, a new world, something that will surprise me. And I've always been switching around from one to the other. Like, if I work a few years on one, I get fed up and I go to the other, and vice versa. This time I've been trying to do both at the same time, which has been quite a workload. But Shadow Empire has already been released on Matrix in June, and will release probably, if this interview is aired when I think it will be aired, will be released today. And Decisive Campaigns 4 has been in the works for over 2 years now, I think. And I hope to switch my full attention to this title after the release on Steam of Shadow Empire and initial support work. Extra clients always means some extra support work.
Well, I think that throughout all your titles, you've actually, mentioning the support work side, you've actually engaged with the customers and with the audience a great deal. And I know that that is appreciated, and that also is one of the key elements to the loyalty a lot of customers have to your games. But let's talk for a moment about Decisive Campaigns, Ardennes Offensive itself. So on this one, compared to the previous Decisive Campaigns titles, you decided on a change in focus and scope. And this time you moved to the lower end of the operational scale of Wargames, where the main unit of maneuver is the battalion. And you've tried to create some new innovations here at this scale. And on the one hand, from what I've seen, you're going back to some core wargaming concepts, but on the other hand, you're also really trying to bring the battlefield alive. And you're adding a lot of historical choices focused around movement, combat, and logistics at this scale. So for someone who has played other war games, either the previous Decisive Campaigns games or others at the operational scale, what would be your elevator pitch, so to speak, your quick summary of why they should be excited about the upcoming Decisive Campaigns Ardennes Offensive?
I hate elevator pitches. But seriously, in short, I think it's the most fun Decisive Campaigns game I did so far. Mm-hmm. It actually, I've been enjoying myself the most playing this version of Decisive Campaigns. There's something that just works well with the design as I did it this time. And I guess it has to do, as you said already, with the skill. We introduced a lot of new rules, including intercept fire, for example. And there's a constant tension if I play Decisive Campaigns 4. Around every corner, there might be an enemy unit hiding, which can actually immediately fire upon you if there's a line of sight. And it brings the tension of like what you usually see in more tactical war games to the operational level. And I'm very happy with this. And this was not at all an elevator pitch. The elevator pitch is it's the most fun Decisive Campaigns game so far.
I actually think the part about, it brings some of the tension of the tactical scale to the operational scale is a heck of an elevator pitch too. And that's what I was seeing too. I have to say, when I was playing through the beta version, it struck me, and I've read many accounts of actual warfare on the Eastern Front, on the Western Front, in the Pacific, and there's always, even at the operational level, this fog of war relating to where the enemy is. And oh my gosh, how did that unit of enemy get behind our lines? And what are they doing in the village behind us? Or how did they get a roadblock over there? Or have we been encircled on this side? Or do we have enough reconnaissance over there? Do we really know the front there is free of the enemy? And I had some of that same experience, playing with Ardennes Offensive in a way that I haven't really had with a lot of other operational war games. So I think you're spot on there. And so let's get into some of those details to talk through the features and the improvements. So starting with the setting, of course, with the Battle of the Bulge, but talk about your decisions about the scale and the scope and some of the choices you made about both the map and time scale, the unit scale, how you're handling the map and the elevations.
Before I start, I should mention that I'm doing this game together with David Cambina from Italy, and he's taking care of the big brunt of scenario design and compiling the orders of battle, tables of organization and equipment, etc. So I have my hands free to focus on the actual game design, which is good and bad at the same time. I like to do this research myself, but David is really good at it. And as you know, Barbarossa I did together with Cameron Harris.
Right.
And we have a completely different, I have a completely different partner here with Decisive Campaigns for completely different strengths compared to Cameron Harris, who brought a lot of innovation with like role-playing game aspects to Barbarossa. And here with David, we're really like trying to go back to the core of hex and counter wargaming, and there's no role-playing aspects. And there's officers and they have cards and stuff, but it's very minor compared to Barbarossa or Shadow Empire. So the focus is really on how to make a core hex counter game here and do it as good as I can. So for your question, the scale is 1 hex is 1 kilometer. The units are almost all at battalion size, which means that the division consists of roughly about 12 to 16 units, or sometimes even more. The turn time is approximately 6 hours per turn, which gives us 4 turns per day, which means, for example, that the monster scenario, because there's one big monster scenario, at least one big monster scenario that's going to be in there, the full Ardennes campaign on battalion level for 16 days. So the biggest thing you're going to have is like about a 200 by 180 hex map with a lot of units and 64 turns. But luckily, we decided to also provide quite a number of medium and small size scenarios, which are especially well adapted, I believe, to play by email play. And a lot of fun, also against AI, but I always prefer to play humans myself. So I like games that end in 8 or 12 turns, because, like 64 turns, it's just too much, especially in beta testing.
Well, it definitely helps to have those scenarios for testing, and those are the ones I've been tinkering around with too, as the smaller ones. But even that big campaign, I mean, first off, that's going to be very appealing to a lot of wargamers, but that doesn't sound unmanageable. That sounds, 64 turns is not that bad, honestly.
No, it's not unmanageable, but it's I consider it a monster scenario.
Mm-hmm.
It's big.
Yeah, I think it's going to scratch the monster itch. Yeah.
It's going to take you a half an hour to 25 half an hour, 25 minutes, half an hour at least to move all your units.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you're playing the Germans. I think it'll be quicker if you're playing the Americans, especially at the start of the offensive, right? Because the line is quite weak. All their reinforcements are arriving in the days that come after. But the Germans, they have amassed a rather serious order of battle on that little piece of front line over there in the Ardennes. But I think, there's different kind of players. Some people like monster scenarios. Some people like small scenarios. So we're trying to cater to everybody.
Yeah.
And we have included a super duper, excuse me for the word, that sounds a bit old fashioned, super duper, a very good scenario editor. Because all previous Decisive Campaigns games, they didn't have a good scenario editor. Almost nobody managed to make scenarios for those games just because it was complicated. So it's been completely revamped and it's not easy to use.
I think that's very exciting, actually, because
yeah. Shoot.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm expecting to see quite a number of scenarios because there's many battles to model I
think the battalion scale, all this. I think first off, the scale and scope that you've chosen, I think, is very well chosen, combined with the features that you've implemented, which we'll go into more detail about in a sec, because I think it really contributes to making this more dynamic, more tense operational scale battle work. And I think it also opens up to a wider possibility of scenarios, some of which haven't been done in previous operational scale games that tended to be more at the regimental, brigade, division scale. So I'm with you. I think it's exciting. I think there are going to be a lot of scenarios made for this that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Let's talk a little bit more about some of the other features for wargamers to help understand. So we have this idea of no hex ownership, which leads to reconnaissance and infiltration tactics. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, it's been a big change engine-wise, because all the other titles, including Shadow Empire, they all have hex ownership. Every hex is owned by somebody, and if you own a hex, you have full reconnaissance on that hex. And we dropped that completely in Ardennes, and now there's a few hexes you can own, but these be towns of a certain size, or supply depots or supply sources, but that's about maybe one hex on average, one hex in 100, one hex in 200, and all the others, they do not have ownership. So if there's a part of the map you have no units, you have no idea what's going on. It should still be yours, right? But a few turns later, are you still so sure if you didn't send any garrison unit over there? Not a single jeep to just take a look if everything is still cool over there. And I like it. It feels more like feels less gamey in a way to have done away with hex ownership.
I agree. I think it works very well. And you still got choices as a player when it comes to reconnaissance, both on the ground and in the air. So if you really decide to leave an area full of fog of war, that's your choice, and you may pay the price for that a turn or two later. And there's also, again, in this dynamic battlefield that you've created here, there's also the 1 kilometer per hex scale, there's interception and interdiction fire as units are moving around. And we're talking about, in some cases, even what would be considered direct fire, right?
Yeah, actually, the engine distinguishes in indirect fire and direct fire.
Mm-hmm.
And for direct fire to be efficient, we're not talking about range here because the range is always quite short.
Mm-hmm.
It's 1 kilometer. So, but with direct fire, the unit that's firing has to have a good line of sight on its actual target. Mm-hmm. While with indirect fire, it's quite different. With indirect fire, basically, a unit needs to have a good line of sight on the target, or maybe multiple units together. They can radio the coordinates over to the actual artillery unit or mortar unit who's doing the firing. So you can actually use units as spotters. There's some interest here to maybe occupy a nice hilltop, which has a good view in the valley below, just to coordinate artillery fire and to hamper enemy movement. Maybe if it's not very deadly, if the Germans are moving through a valley, the Americans have a good look on the road in this valley. Then while the Germans are moving in their turn, they will receive intercept fire from artillery and they will lose action points during this. So it's one of the interesting, there's many interesting situations that can arise out of the rule set as we compile it this time.
Mm-hmm. And there's also this concept now, you got two other areas where you've built in a lot more detail in the choices a player has for their units. One is in how they move and fight. So you've got this idea of march versus combat modes. And then if they're actually fighting, when they're choosing to attack, you've got a much more detailed combat system, including different choices of attack intensities. Could you talk about those a bit?
Allowing the player to choose to go to march mode, he actually doubles the range of his unit. And this way you can move units from, I don't know, from the north of the map to the south of the map at more or less historical speed. Mm-hmm. While at the actual front line, you will not see any units in march mode. Mm-hmm. You can try, but it will not be very clever, because if a unit is in march mode and it finds itself in intercept fire or in combat, it will suffer a big penalty because it's not deployed for battle. So this way, there's like different rates of movement on the front line and just behind, and together, of course it's a compromise, but it works, I think. So you get the historical feel of combat at this scale and the movement ranges that correspond with history at the same time. Well, basically there, I just, because recon is very important. So I also wanted to add like an aggressive way to do recon for the player, because maybe you don't have any airplanes to do a recon mission on a certain area of hexes or a certain hex, or maybe you do not have another like recon unit you could move up to get more recon points on said hex. And in this case, you can just use one of your combat units, attack the hex in question, but attack it as a probe or a recon in force. And this way you will not suffer many casualties, but you'll get many recon points on the hex. And when I did that, I thought like, well, if we're adding attack modes anyway, let's go also for the option to go for an all-out attack, which is sort of comparable to how, for example, the SS forces in the Ardennes offensive in the north, how they attacked at the beginning of the offensive, almost like the Russians. The Russian Ura attack, right? They scream something to give courage to the troops, and then they all assault.
Hey, diddle diddle, straight up the middle, right?
and this does not go very well, but it can go well if you have a lot of troops to spare and you really want to take a hex.
Right.
So basically, it gives you more combat punch, but at the price of more casualties.
Let's also discuss supply and logistics. So this is something that I think a lot of wargamers at any scale are interested in, but especially at the operational scale. So how does the supply system and the logistics system at this scale work? What are the basics of it?
If I go for the simple explanation, there's two special hexes you need to keep an eye on. First, you need to keep an eye on your supply sources, which are basically which basically simulate off-map piles of oil and ammunitions. These supply sources, they send their supplies to all the units on the map. You can activate a special supply layer to see what the range is of a specific supply source. And if something is in a range, it will receive a certain percentage of supplies depending on the range. And there's also supply bases. These supply bases, they can act in two different roles. First one is that they actually act in the role of helping the supply source to reach further, to extend the range of the supply source. And the second one is that they can themselves directly feed units in a limited range around them. Why this double function? Well, basically the real reason I did it initially was because, well, for the Germans to succeed, they depended a lot on actually capturing American supply bases. They were short on oil, especially. So to properly simulate this in the game and to give the Germans a chance to do what they historically didn't succeed in very well, I added these supply bases. Because if you capture one, you capture the oil as well. And then the Germans can immediately resupply their panzers around that supply base. But you have to choose. Either you consume it or you use it to extend the range of your supply sources.
One of the things you mentioned in some of your notes to me also was the traffic congestion was now modeled.
Right. Well, many things are modeled now.
Okay.
I try to focus completely just on the hex and counter rules and don't do anything. Just add all the stuff that I would like to see in an Ardennes game. And another thing that had to be in there is traffic congestion, because if something, well, a couple of things thwarted the Germans eventually. American air power for sure, but also the lack of a good road network in the area of operations. So what happens in DC Ardennes is if you move for example, your Panzer division over, say, like a major road, like one of the sealed roads going to Saint-Vith, there will probably be a little bit of traffic congestion. And this traffic congestion will make it cost more to move units over this road. So basically your whole division will slow down a bit. But here we're talking about a good road. And usually this is not going to happen because the Americans know this. And they try to keep these roads blocked, at least at some point. So also German units, especially because there's so many, they're taking like secondary roads, dirt roads. And these are horrible roads. And they're like, if you try to move a division over a dirt road, you will very quickly see major traffic congestion penalties. And there's not much the Germans can do about this. It's sort of like something they have to live with. Either get the good roads open or...
Yeah, you got to take Bastogne, right? And get all the good roads if you actually want to have a supply net. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let me go over.
It's a very hard operation.
So let me go over a few more of the features. I know we don't have much time left, so let me go through a few more of the features and ask if you want to make any specific comments on them. I know there is a more detailed weather system that has weather very appropriate to the fighting in the Ardennes. There are some very nice new map and unit graphics, which we'll show some screenshots of. There are some improvements to the AI. Do you want to comment on any of those in specific?
I went a bit overboard with graphically modeling the different types of weather. But I don't know, I liked it. I felt it was sort of a detail that was, I don't know, it was important for me at this scale to show the ground conditions properly in the map graphics. I'm not sure, but I think there's actually 6 different conditions, 6 different graphic sets for the.
It looks great, I have to say.
Access now. So I don't know. It gives a sense of for me, a sense of being there, and maybe I went overboard. What do you think?
No, I think that's true. And some people, I think, who maybe haven't gotten into the battle for the Ardennes to a great deal, might have this image, sort of perhaps from movies and such, that they were fighting in the middle of a blizzard with tons of snow. But really, all these conditions that you described, they really went through all those conditions at various parts of the Battle of the Bulge. So I think it's good to see those modeled. So if I can summarize this, then when we look at all the operational war games that have been made to date for the computer, I think this stacks up very well. And from my own play experience with the beta, I think it does create a very dynamic and a challenging battlefield. And the wargamer has a lot of choices going down to the formation and the individual unit level. You've also got your leaders at your HQs with the influence they can have through some of their decisions on the battlefield. And you've got the strategic choices that are a hallmark of the Decisive Campaign series, where each turn you're sort of choosing where to put your command focus and how to influence the battlefield there. The end result, and again, I mentioned this earlier, is that it really, really stacks up well when you read the historical accounts of the Battle of the Bulge, and then you play through this game at this scale. You really feel like you're reading some of those historical accounts. So in my opinion, I know a lot of people say, well, there have been a lot of Battle of the Bulge games. You know, this is actually a fresh and new take on the Battle of the Bulge. And I think wargamers who are familiar with the history, if they pick up Decisive Campaigns or Ardennes Offensive and play it, they will find, I think, that it makes a very credible retelling with all the operational and tactical choices of the Battle of the Bulge. So, Vic.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you the $1 million question, I think, for a lot of people, which is, what's your best guess at this point on when wargamers will be able to get their hands on Decisive Campaigns, Ardennes Offensive?
It needs about a few months more work. I still need to start a serious beta test as well. So my gut feeling is it will probably be middle to end of Q2, but take it with a grain of salt, because
sure,
to take this development easy. If it's not ready yet, I'm going to delay a bit. It's ready, it's going to be released. It's already quite far. Everything is, like, functionality wise, everything is already in there. The scenarios are almost finished. It's just the interface that needs a bit of a lift up, and the AI needs a bit of a, because it's really good at the moment, but I need to add in some extra long-term algorithms to help it, like in the 64-turn scenario, for example. It needs to think a bit more strategically as well. So it's close, but not yet there. Let's hope Q2 is going to work.
Sure. So late Q2. I mean, that's a fair estimate, and we always bake these until they're done. So it'll come out of the oven when it's done, but that's our best guess right now. And then a last sort of parting words here. When you look back at all your experiences to date, you look at all the games that you've worked on, all the people you've worked with, what words of wisdom or advice would you have for wargame developers or designers that may be just now working on or considering whether to start on their first game?
I would say, and that sounds maybe a little bit conservative, but after so many years, I would say, like, unless you're a genius, you should take a real hard think about how to avoid disaster in development. So don't think only about the opportunities. Think about what could go wrong, and illustrate this a bit. To make this advice a bit more practical, I would say, like, if your new game, if it's doing multiple new things you've never done before, I'd want to scrap those new things until there's only one new thing left. This way you can be sure you can probably handle it. In a previous title I never finished, for example, I tried to move from 2D graphics to 3D graphics, design a whole new strategy game system, and at the same time I wanted to have a graphic novel in there which was procedural, and I did it in a programming language I never used before, and it's like 4 things, and you should.
That's a pretty heavy lift right there.
You should aim on the conservative side, and if it works with one new thing, you can always add a second at that stage, but don't do everything at the same time. Be clever, and don't work for years and then lose all that time for nothing.
Thanks. I think those are good words from experience. And I want to say thank you, Vic, for joining us today. I hope the rest of your 2020 is good. We'll be hearing more about decisive campaigns. In the Ardennes offensive. So in 2021, we'll be hearing a lot more about it. And at this point, I think and probably safe to say many other wargamers are now looking forward to it. And for those out in their audience who haven't tried Vic's other games, I really strongly encourage you to take a look. I think you'll find them among the most engrossing and the most immersive war games and strategy games that you can get. And as I'll point out one last time, Shadow Empire should be releasing on Steam the day that this is aired. Go take a look at it. Thank you very much, Vic.
My pleasure.
All right, this was Decisive Campaigns for Ardennes Offensive. I find it interesting and fascinating how, in the same series of games, which is, coming to number 4 now, which is already a big achievement in wargames industry in general. But, Vic has managed to fit in so many different concepts and gameplay approaches. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, it's true. Vic manages to add something new every time. So initially, he moved to add command and high command level challenges for the player to deal with, including some very interesting ethical challenges to deal with in a game like Decisive Campaigns Barbarossa. In this one, he's actually gone down in scale, and he's looked at the operational scale and said, there are a lot of actually what would normally be considered tactical matters that do affect the operational scale when you bring the hex scale down to a certain level, and it makes for a very dynamic, more interesting operational scale game when you build those in. And I think it's going to be something that players will really enjoy.
Yeah, it's almost like a perfect bridge with the next one, because I think there's a lot of similarities in how Flashpoint Campaigns, Southern Storm, or just in general Flashpoint Campaign series tackles this, right? The decisions that's tactical at the same time impact the overall operational effect into the game. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of times war games are divided up into the scale that they cover. And it's a pretty fine line between the low end of the operational scale and the high end of the grand tactical scale where Flashpoint Campaigns fits. You can think of the Flashpoint Campaigns as just barely a step down, looking into a more detailed, battle view of one of the operational scale battles in a game like Vic's.
Yeah, and I think that as opposed to Vic and his approach to his games, which is like every game is very, very different. The Flashpoint Campaigns team has managed to find a solid basis that they built on top of it, and adding more depth and innovation each time.
Well, it's interesting because the Flashpoint campaign series, and I don't know how many people know this, but it actually is one of the oldest lineages in wargaming. If you trace it back to its true origins, way back when we started with Flashpoint Germany, that was actually built on the inspiration created by some very old Simulations Canada games from the 80s, war games that focus on the fog of war. Basically, we reinvented the idea with Flashpoint Germany, and then built on that for Red Storm and now Southern Storm. But there's a lot of old school wargame inspiration built into this, and Rob Crandall, who we'll be interviewing for Flashpoint campaigns, actually goes back to the beginning in terms of working with wargames. So it'll be interesting to get his take on that and how he sees the grand tactical side of things and the Cold War side of things having evolved.
All right, let's jump right in then. I'll see you later.
And welcome, everyone, and a big welcome to Rob Crandall of the On Target Simulations team and the lead developer for Flashpoint Campaigns Southern Storm. Hello, Rob. Welcome.
Thank you, Eric. It's good to be here.
So we talk with each other pretty often, but it's nice to have a chance to talk together with our customers about Flashpoint Campaign Southern Storm, which is coming. And we'll talk more about the details of that timing later. So I just want to give a little bit of an introduction to those who may not be familiar with the Flashpoint Campaigns series, which is one of my favorites. Flashpoint Campaigns, I would say, is a very distinguished historical wargame series. It's been recognized by many through a lot of reviews and customer feedback as the best grand tactical Cold War computer wargame in existence. And I think it has some very unique features. One of the things I want to highlight to those who may not be familiar with it is that it is a WeGo war game. In other words, both sides put in their orders simultaneously, and then they are executed simultaneously, which leads to some really great fog of war and friction of war. And also the turns are asynchronous and based on the effective command and control of each side. And it's effectively a simulation of Colonel Boyd's OTA loop, or observe, orient, decide, and act. In other words, how quickly each side gets through its command cycle. And of course, it also models pretty much every aspect of combat during a hypothetical Cold War gone hot in 1989. But there's now, I think Flashpoint Campaigns fans know all that. Those who haven't played Flashpoint Campaigns, there's a little teaser of what you may find unique as a wargame experience in Flashpoint Campaigns. But a lot of people may not realize that Flashpoint Campaigns also has a long history of its own in wargaming. And I wonder if you could briefly tell us how all this got started for you, first with Simulations Canada, then Matrix Games and Slytherin.
Certainly. I live in Canada, and I hooked up with Simulations Canada back in something like 1985. I made 3 games for them, and for the IBM PC. And basically, they were almost text games, or not a dungeon crawl, but a bit of a text game. Only it was a war game. There were no graphics, and I very much enjoyed that. Matrix bought out the rights to those games in early 2000, as I recall.
Yep.
And as a former developer for them, I contacted Matrix and said, "What's going on? Are you going to redevelop these?" And I was told, "Yes, we would love to. How would you like to do it?" And here's a choice of topics.
Yep.
And one of the choices was like Greece or Red Sky Morning, which was a naval air strategic thing. Awfully a lot like Command, possibly, if you'd gone back that far in time. And the other was Main Battle Tank, which was set in a hypothetical Cold War gone hot situation in Germany, central Germany. And you're commanding a battalion, typically, a strong battalion. And I thought, oh, that's a change for me. I've done a lot of naval air, and I'm interested in that. So let's go with that. And that was in 2002 that we said, okay, let's go. And in 2005, Flashpoint Germany came out. It was in January. And that's what it was. It was kind of like a Panzerblitz on computer almost. It was meant to be at the simpler end of things and more accessible to people.
Very fun war game.
Thank you. I thought it was a hoot, and it was well received. And I went through something like 14 further iterations of the game between 2005 and I don't know, 2011, something like that. And I decided, no, it's time for a major engine rewrite. And by then, I had a team. I'd been a solo developer to start with, but with Flashpoint Germany being out, I attracted a couple more people, and we all started working together. Became on-target simulations.
And the team has continued to grow in size.
It has, adding members to this day. There's a lot of work to do. We have to share it. But going back, what was it? October 2013. That's when we released Flashpoint Campaigns Red Storm. And that one was actively in development up until November 2017, which doesn't seem that long ago. We had something like 14 improvements and iterations. We got a tremendous amount of feedback from our players. And when you're modeling and simulating this historical time period, there are a lot of people out there who were in those armed forces at the time and can say, yeah, I was a tanker and I was doing this, I was doing that. And one of the nicest compliments we got ultimately was a Red Army tanker. And he bought the game, he played the Russian side using Soviet tactics, doing it the way they were trained, and he won. He said, this is fantastic, this actually works.
It's been a long road. I mean, and you and I started working together back on Flashpoint Germany. So it's been, almost 2 decades now that we've been working together. And a lot of the team have been together for a long time too.
Indeed, we've had Monday calls for years and years and years, Eric. And, yeah, very stable team. Once people join, they never seem to want to leave. That's all good.
And now in recent times, you and the OTS team have been spending a lot of time working with the military, the US military, the UK military, a few others on professional projects, which are based on the Flashpoint campaign's design. And we can't talk much about that, nor is that the focus of this stream, other than that it's been keeping you all very, very busy. But at the same time, we know that there are a lot of wargamers who've been asking, well, when are we going to get to see more Flashpoint campaigns for wargamers? And in the background, you've been working on a new commercial release for many years now as a follow-on, which we are calling Flashpoint Campaigns Southern Storm. And now, for someone who has played Flashpoint Campaigns Red Storm or other wargamers who haven't, if you had to put together, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, if you had to put together a brief elevator pitch, just from your point of view, what stands out for you as far as why they would be excited about Southern Storm? What makes it different for them?
The general elevator pitch, and I still like it the best, is the Cold War in Germany goes hot. This was the first team on each side, the best of the best, all the most modern, potent gear. They had to win. There was no fooling around. There was no going back. It was do or die. In what was at that time the most lethal battle environment ever seen on a battlefield. To be seen was to be killed was the mantra then. The slightly longer version of that is that this is high intensity, modern grand tactical combat. And by grand tactical, I mean range matters, but facing doesn't. So you're commanding platoons, companies, you're overall in command of a strong battalion or a strong regiment typically. And you've got a day to secure your objectives, to do whatever your mission is. And let the chips fall where they may, because you might be lucky to get to the end of the day with even a shred of your original forces. They were talking at the time of the half-life of a soldier at the sharp end being 2-3 hours. You can see that happening in this game.
Mm-hmm. Well, you got me sold. Let's get into the details a bit now with respect to Southern Storm. Now, as far as the scope and the scale, so you talked a little bit about Grand Tactical, and I do think that's an underused scale, which Flashpoint Campaigns does very well, where it's tactical enough that you can really get into the details of the equipment and they matter. But it's just a step up above the single man, single vehicle. So you actually have battles that are of significant size and are significantly meaningful, and you're exploring tactics that are just a step above, what a squad leader would be thinking of. What about the setting? So in Southern Storm, where is this set in terms of the Cold War, and what nations are included, and what do you have planned as far as the general amount of content that's going to be included?
Game is set again in the summer of 1989. That's really the last time that the Warsaw Pact had a feasible chance doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
And also, battlefield computers, modern precision guided weapons, things like that, was still a gleam in the eye. They had a few things, but things changed radically after that. So this is the best of the Cold War hardware. So set in the southern third of Germany, the NATO lineup at that point on our side of the inter-German border was US 5th Corps, 7th Corps, West German 2nd Corps. So you had Americans and West Germans. Facing them were the Soviets with lots of East German allies, which will be new to the game, Czechoslovakian forces, which are new to the game. And then in depth behind the NATO front line were French, substantial French forces, and a Canadian brigade. So we're adding East Germans, Czechs, Canadians, and French, the four nationalities we have in the first game.
Awesome.
Maps, typically are 15 to 20 kilometers in size, same as before. But as part of the massive rewrites that we've been doing in the engine these few years and to help support our professional users, we can go quite a bit larger now. You can go to 40 by 30 kilometer maps, which are 4 times the area. That creates all kinds of interesting new things, because to survive in a Cold War battlefield, you had to be pretty dispersed. You could not concentrate, or you'd simply be obliterated from above. And so this really gives you a lot of room to maneuver. The density of forces is quite low, and you're playing sort of a cat and mouse hide and seek game.
And it is very realistic for the theater and the time frame.
Yeah. You just could not be spotted. It was death to be picked out too quickly. And so it gets kind of interesting. It's almost a bit like a naval battle. I often think of the Battle of Midway, where there was that all-important reconnaissance phase right at the beginning. Each side's feeling out where the other one might be.
Right.
And then when they do, they drop the hammer. And you want to be the first to attack first. And you would think that would have no application to a ground game, but darn it, you have to pay attention to the recon battle. You have to think about where you're positioning your units and what avenues of advance they're going to use and how they're going to get from one place to another. And if you're a little too lighthearted and don't pay attention to the details, you can get your head handed to you very quickly by inferior forces.
The lethality is very, there's a lot of lethality on that battlefield, that's for sure. You touched briefly on this, but you mentioned that you can handle larger maps. Now, I just want to mention also, it's a 64-bit engine now, correct?
The maps consume, so much memory, and we have multiple layers to each map, and then multiple size maps for the scrolling and zooming and all that kind of thing. So 32 bits just wasn't enough.
And from what I've seen in my own testing, everything's a bit faster than it was, for those who are used to, the last commercial release.
That was a design goal. We've rewritten everything. All the combat models are much more detailed, all kinds of things. The information displays are all much more detailed. But we had to keep it running as fast as the previous game. And we also had to not impose any more burden on the player to play. If you played the old game, you can sit down and play the new game. And yes, there are all kinds of new things to play with, and extra buttons and whistles and cool little items that you can dwell on, but you don't have to. You know, the game supplies reasonable defaults. You can just go and do it the way you did before.
And I think we're going to provide some screenshots as part of this presentation, but I just want to say that the new user interface is very nice from my standpoint. You've got, you know, those floating and dockable panels, as you just mentioned. You've got some of these, you know, additional reports and overlays that you can drill down into if you wish. You've got extra status indicators. So a player can kind of configure the game to look and inform them the way they want, right?
Yes, exactly. We wanted to make it look more presentable and also to use screen space more efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the design team was a staff officer in a division. And he said, you know, if we're going to do all this work, let's organize it correctly. Like, let's have reports by staff officer. Here's what the operations officer says. Here's what Intel says. Here's what some of the other guys say. And probably have 10 times now the staff information that we did before. So you can orient much better before a battle, during a battle, reviewing, seeing what.
And let's talk about the data and the combat resolution as well. So why don't you walk us through a little bit, sort of in what ways, from your perspective, is the combat and the data improved from Red Storm?
We deepened the data model in almost every aspect. There's simply more of everything, and in some cases, it's by an order of magnitude. Mm-hmm. More units, more depth to the units, more in the way of sensors, ammunition types, all kinds of things, to increase the fidelity of the simulation. If the player doesn't want to pay attention, doesn't have to. He does. He can learn a whole lot of things that will be very important to him. And then that's all surfaced in the information displays. So we had, in the first game, a subunit inspector, which was, you know, just a small little presented highlight information. Now it's got 5 pages of information. It's hard to summarize just in a single thing, but virtually every step of the process, from spotting through to delivering fire to, you know, the damage and the effects of fire, been rewritten, deepened, tightened up.
Well, I think that's what you really want to get across, is that really no stone has been left unturned over the years since the last commercial release. The entire model has had a relook and an overhaul, if you will. As you said, everything from spotting to the actual resolution of the shots. And it's worth mentioning also, for those who may not be used to playing a WeGo game, you've got what are called standard operating procedures. And they've got reasonable defaults, but you can also configure these as a player. So you can tell your units, hey, you know, I want you to do this, but if these contingencies come up, here's how I want you to react. And that type of guidance, you know, gives you the capability to have your will enacted on the battlefield without necessarily being there every moment, which is important, because as that OTA loop, as that C3 delay, either through casualties, disruption to your command structure, electronic warfare, all of which is modeled in the game, as that piles up, you may get fewer and fewer opportunities to intervene in a more direct, sort of, you know, micromanaging way, and more situations where you have to rely that, boy, you hope you could put your guys in the right place, you hope those SOPs were good, and that the enemy isn't going to be too clever in circumventing your plans. Now, there are a couple more things I wanted to call out. You have engineers set up as separate forces now, and I think you also have the capability to have multinational forces. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. In the old game, engineering was abstracted. So if a river blocked the advance of a unit and needed a bridge, the unit would move to the riverbank, check off a checkbox, basically said, somebody build me a bridge. And half an hour later, a bridge would appear. Now we have discrete engineering units who have to be sent to go build that bridge. And we did that because engineers are scarce and precious. And the Warsaw Pact trained like mad to do bridges. They would have to do a bridge every 10 kilometers or something. And so the fight to stop those engineering units from getting those bridges across was supremely important. Now that we represent the engineers directly, you can call artillery strikes on them, interfere with their progress. And that changes the character of the game. It seems a higher fidelity now to have those. And you may get 4 bridging columns, and you better protect them. You better take good care of them, or you'll be stuck on the wrong side of the river from your victory objective.
Awesome. And with multinational forces, what type of situations do you envision that being used for? I mean, obviously NATO is a multinational force. Are players going to be able to have 2 nations in the same scenario on the same side?
Yes, as many as they like, really.
Mm-hmm.
The weakest part of the front line is the seam between major formations, because each one wants the other to take care of it. And so there's a seam between the American and West German forces. Mm-hmm. And then as the French engage, there are lots of seams there too. So yes, that would be a logical place to run a Warsaw Pact force through. Mm-hmm. And I suppose it's true vice versa. You know, if they were on their back foot, we'd be looking for their seams. The Canadian role in all this, as near as I can tell, this was in a book a while ago, was specifically to help seal up seams. They were deep in the rear. They didn't know where the seam would quite end up, but they were going to be the stopper.
They were the fire brigade. Yeah.
Indeed. And so we're looking to have some standalone scenarios for them. There'll be probably 14 to 16 standalone, featuring all the various forces. And then a campaign for each of the major nationalities. And there'll be one for the Canadians as well, where they're kind of the fire brigade and it's hoping to high heavens that the enemy's attrited enough by the time it gets to them that they can make it a fair fight.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I mean, I should say the content is something that's still very much a work in progress. We're working with some very experienced scenario designers on that, but I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm sure you're looking forward to being able to run the Canadians through their paces. I know I'll be giving that a try. I've also got some friends who served in the 7th Corps at this time, so I've got some personal curiosity there too. And I guess the last thing I wanted to mention here is I know a lot of people will ask this question. So have you spent any time on the AI?
Massively. We have a guy on the team, William, who literally has written chapters in game programming books on AI. I very gratefully handed over the baton to him a few years ago now. And yeah, there's some substantial AI improvements. Starting with the ability of a collection of units to think as a group. We kind of simulated that before, but now we actually do it. And there's a whole new system of setting up hints to each player. You know, here's what you should do. It's not a scripting system. It simply sets weights and things that give a lot more replayability and create more interesting situations for the AI. And something else that we're doing is that we're setting up different setup zones. So if there's a scenario, there's not just one setup zone for each side. There can be as many as the scenario author likes. And you can really move units around. And concurrently with that, he can set up separate victory point locations. So you might use the victory point locations to incent forces to go in certain directions and secure certain objectives. And best of all, you can now hide those victory point locations from the other side. So you may have a game where, the red force is going to start in the south. Well, no, it's going to be southeast. The third variation, they're in the east. And the victory point locations they're driving for, they're playing for, are hidden from you as the NATO player. And so you really have to have your wits about you to try and fathom it out. And even if you played it 3 or 4 times, it still will not play exactly the same each time. And you can't take anything for granted. So it creates this marvelous fog of war and all this tension and uncertainty until right comes down to the final end. So we really enjoy that. We're looking forward to getting lots of feedback on that from people.
Rob, that sounds awesome. And I have to say, overall, that's one heck of a set of features and improvements. And I'll tell everyone here, from what I've seen working with the OTS team, the result is going to be something that every wargamer who is interested in the Cold War, you're going to want this on your computer. And as we wrap this up, Rob, I've got just a couple more questions for you. So when can wargamers expect to likely see this title?
Knock on wood, Eric, but the fall of 2021.
Excellent. And then my last question for you is, looking back on all your experiences to date, do you have any words of wisdom or advice for war game developers or designers who might be considering whether to make a war game or might be starting work on their first war game?
I'd love to. Yeah, thank you, Eric. There are just a few things I'd concentrate on. As a programmer, limit the scope of what you're trying to do with your game. It's so easy to imagine all the things you'd like it to do, and the work expands exponentially and you don't get anything done. You can spend a lot of time coding and not finish anything. To get it finished, you have to limit the scope pretty drastically, because it's just so much more work possibly than even an experienced programmer could imagine. But it's doable. The second thing, as a game designer, again, you're kind of trying to limit the scope a little bit. Your game has to have a reason for being. There has to be certain things that you're trying to model and that really drive the design. For me, in this game, it was simulating the commander's mind, who's running a battalion or a brigade, possibly a regiment, certainly. What kind of issues does he face? What's his viewpoint? You're not going to play every single position of every man on the battlefield. You're playing the one that's the commander. So things that are of interest to him, he needs to know, you represent. Things that are somebody else's job, you don't represent quite as much. There's a selective fidelity, and you extract out a lot of that. Supply, for example. So as a designer, pick out 3 to 5 things, possibly, that this is what the game is going to portray and do. If you go too high and have too many, the game becomes so confusing and it's such a high learning curve that people struggle. If you don't have enough, if you have one, you've got tic-tac-toe, people's interest. But if you can pick 3 to 5 things that are really interesting, then you can jump in and, I think, create a really interesting game. Just keep the scope in check so you don't actually make it too hard to finish. And one last thing I'd mention for game designers, tell a fun story. Well, obviously, everybody wants to tell a fun story. What makes a war game fun? Well, actually, it's very specific. Present the player with an interesting dilemma. And there'll be a whole series of them, but let's pick one. Say you're playing NATO, and the very first Soviet Warsaw Pact unit shows up on the map. It's a couple of scout cars. You have lots of artillery, but you've not been given very much ammunition for them. So the dilemma is, do I shoot or not? And you go, well, the developer said the reconnaissance battle is supremely important. Maybe I should take a shot. So you're thinking, okay, I'm going to take a shot. And you give orders to your artillery. In this game, as commander overall, you don't fire the gun. You give orders to your staff. They call down to the battery, talk to the guy, give him the target, all that kind of stuff. Nowadays, it's computer. Then it was voice. It takes minutes from the time you form the intent as commander until the shells impact on the target zone. So, stage 2 of fun. You create a period of suspense. You've made the decision. Now you wait. And in this game, you click on the game clock to start it, and the minutes start to tick by. You're looking at that reconnaissance unit going, okay, let's see the artillery animations. Let's see the explosions. And the time's ticking. You're going, oh, yeah, it takes a while for artillery. Will they get it done in time or not? So you're creating the suspense. And darned if the recon unit doesn't move a hex. It's moved out of where you just. And then it moves again. And then it moves again. And you're going, the game will correct the fire if somebody's observing, but not by very much. And then the artillery animations arrive. And that's the relief of the suspense. That's stage 3. So you create a dilemma, you had a period of suspense, and then within a reasonable amount of time, you've resolved it. I missed. Gee. But you do it in a way that's understandable. Oh, I was too late. It took too long. Gee, maybe if I'm shooting at a fast-moving reconnaissance unit, artillery is not the best way to go. Oh, I know something now for next time. Try it differently. And so you do this. You don't create too many of these or you overwhelm the player. You don't create too few or you bore them. Some are little, like what I've just described. Some take the whole game to find out. Because of fog of war, you may put up a defense here at this bridge, expecting the enemy to come for it. Guess what? Half an hour later, you find out his objective was far to the north. It was that other bridge up there. Oh, so creating, suspending, and then answering, kind of resolving, is what you want to do to really get people hooked. And when they end up finishing that, they'll go, oh, I want to play that again. I want to do that again, because this time I know what to do.
Yeah.
And you've got a happy person.
Thank you, Rob. That's great advice. And I personally relate to that last example. I did actually try that at one point myself. And I want to thank you, Rob, for joining us today. I'm sure we'll be releasing more information on Southern Storm in 2021, but I'm glad fans of Flashpoint campaigns should now have a very good idea of what's coming their way. And to everyone who's watching and listening, if you haven't already tried this great series, but you're curious about the Cold War or about the Grand Tactical Scale or asynchronous WeGo war games, give it a shot. And we'll catch you again later. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Rob, for this interview. I always find Rob fascinating when he discusses about his games. Is really truly gem in terms of knowledge and how he approaches development.
Yeah, Rob is one of the nicest guys in wargaming, I have to say, and his team, the Flashpoint Campaigns team, they are some of the best you'll ever work with.
I agree, and I think that I like it that we sort of move from Flashpoint Campaigns, which is that we've been working with as Matrix Games since almost like forever, right? To 2x3, and another team you've been working with for such a long time, Eric. Yeah,
actually, I can't overstate what an influence Gary Grigsby and Joel Billings have had on computer wargaming. As most of our audience probably knows, Joel was the founder of Strategic Simulations Incorporated, SSI. And I, for one, grew up playing Gary's and Joel's games. So it's always been an honor for me to work with them on bringing new war games to the community over the last 20 years or so. And War in the East 2 is the biggest and the best they've ever made. I think a lot of people will recognize Gary as I think it would be fair to say the king of monster computer war games. And I don't think War in the East 2 will disappoint. And Joel's going to be with us to talk through the development process of War in the East 2 and how it differs from War in the East 1 and War in the West, why they chose to go down this route of making a sequel to one of the all-time best war games ever made. And I think it's not going to be an interview to be missed.
Very good. So I think we'll see that right now, and we'll come back to our chat. To do a little bit of a goodbye and to 2021, because there's going to be so much happening. I'll see you later.
Farewell to 2020 and good riddance. Hello, 2021.
Hello already. Let's do it now, man. Yeah.
Welcome, Joel.
Hey, Eric.
So everyone, this is Joel Billings of 2x3 Games, and we speak with each other quite often about what we're going to talk about today, which is the upcoming Gary Grigsby's War in the East 2, since we're working on the project together. But I'm very glad that we're going to get a chance to share some information about this release, to pull back the curtain and get the audience excited and talk to the wargaming community directly about it. Now, I think that most of the people tuning in today to this stream about war games have probably heard your name and Gary's in the past and have probably played some of your games. There are really so many awards and accolades to go through that I don't know that I can really mention them, but you guys are pretty much the Hall of Fame as far as a war game team goes. And I think a lot of us, including me, can honestly say that our careers and the path we chose has been inspired and influenced a lot by what you and Gary have accomplished. So for those that may be newer to wargaming, I want to talk a bit about your careers, though, because your and Gary's history sort of coincides, and in a large part is involved in and responsible for creating strategy and wargaming on the computer. So before we get into War in the East 2 specifically, could you talk for a bit about the timeline from Strategic Simulations Incorporated to the present, how 2x3 games came to be, and if you can think of a good one, share a story from development, one of your favorite stories about the games you've worked on.
Okay. All right. Well, it started in 1979 when I started SSI, right out when I graduated from college. And in 1982, I think it was, we published Gary's first game, which was a Guadalcanal campaign. And from that point, I got to work with Gary on 25 games, I think, over the next 20 years at SSI. And everything from Kampfgruppe to Steel Panthers, all kinds of things that Gary did. And it basically, SSI was sold in 94 to Mindscape. And I stayed with SSI for about 5 or 6 years with Mindscape SSI. And in 2000, when I left there, Gary and I decided that we wanted to keep working together. And we started 2x3 Games along with Keith Broers. Keith had been, he came in as a tech support call answer guy in like 1982 or so, around the same time Gary first came in. And he had become a programmer, one of SSI's top programmers on games like Pool of Radiance. And he'd also done a lot of the tools that Gary had used through the years. We called them Hex Pack, Square Pack, to do all the war games that Gary had worked on. So basically, we started 2x3 Games as World War II by 3 guys, which was Keith, Gary, and myself. And with the idea we'd be focused on World War II games. And that started in 2000. And then we started off with the very first thing we were going to work on was a War in the East game. And literally, so in the summer of 2000, we started that project. We got about 5 months in working on that project and decided, the computers just weren't powerful enough for what we wanted to do. So we shelved that project and we started working on Uncommon Valor and then War in the Pacific, which was another set of monster products that the computers were barely ready for. But we were able to do those. Anyway, so over the last 20 years, Gary and I and with Keith for the first 10 years of that basically worked on a number of games as part of 2x3 Games. And we have a virtual office with people who contribute and help us all around the world. So that's sort of the history. In 2009 or so, Keith went back to Silicon Valley and the mainstream programming, I'd say. And we at that point, we were lucky enough to find somebody from our testing group who came in, Pavel Zagzin, and he became a big part of our projects going forward. And the War in the East, War in the West, and now War in the East too, and it's a big part of the team. So, and as far as the stories from development go, one story is how I met Gary. Was basically in 1981, we released a game called Torpedo Fire, which was a sub simulation game. And Gary called in, and I was the technical support person. Basically, would answer the questions of anybody who called in. And I answered Gary's call. And after talking for a while, he said he had been fooling around on his computer. He just got an Apple computer, and he was fooling around making a game. And would we be interested in looking at it? I said, absolutely, send it in when you have something worth looking at. And amazingly, within about a month or two, he sent it in. And within 6 months, we published Guadalcanal campaign. So we're lucky enough to get them. And then another similar kind of story was in 2009 when we were working on War in the East. We had started getting some testers in to help us. And Pavel was one of the testers who was basically giving us a lot of good feedback and criticism on our map. And he basically started saying, he lived in Vilnius in Lithuania, and he had a lot of interest in the war in the East and in the geography, and we could do a better job on our map. And so I said, great, you want to help us? You want to
you just talked yourself into a job.
Yeah, you got a job with us. So he basically started helping us with the map. And luckily, we found out that he also had some programming skills that he started up. And over time, he just kept doing more and more. Mm-hmm. And before you knew it, he was part of the team and basically, co-programmer with Gary and designer. And so it's been the three of us ever since now on with War in the West, War in the East, War in the West, and now War in the East too.
Thanks. That's great stories. And I'll just say, for those who didn't grow up wargaming in the 80s, like I did, I mean, it was all about SSI. It was, the games that when I look back at, the things that got me into wargaming on the computer, it was games from SSI. It was games that you published, a lot of them that you and Gary worked on together. And then there were strategy games and role-playing games, a lot of which Keith also worked on. It's just, it's privileged to still have a chance to, at this point, be making games with you and with Gary. And let me actually pivot from there to talking about War in the East two specifically. Now, you mentioned just now that you've had in the last 10 years, you and Gary and Pavel worked on War in the East and War in the West, and now War in the East 2. It was really part of a series, and in a lot of ways, that goes back to the beginning of 2x3 games when you first started working on War in the East and shelved it. So in a way, we're sort of coming back full circle now with War in the East 2. We're going back to the first War in the East, but in a completely new way. These types of monster war games are sort of your signature, Gary's signature. And I think a lot of people may initially think, oh, a monster war game, that's a lot to manage. But they're actually remarkably playable. They come with a lot of smaller scenarios as well, and they are remarkably engrossing. I mean, when I sit down for a test session and I say, all right, I've got, 2 hours to play some War in the East 2, before I know it, the 2 hours is gone. I mean, it just goes by in a flash because you get so into these games. And I've heard a lot of wargamers talk about their experiences with War in the East and War in the West as some of their pinnacle experiences in the hobby in general, just because of how much historical detail is in these games and how engrossed you get into them. So now that I've finished pumping it up a little bit, if you were to give a brief sort of elevator pitch, just a few sentences of sort of how you see War in the East 2, and why you decided that to come back and give War in the East another look. So to someone who hasn't played any of the previous games, why would you say that War in the East 2 is a war game, worth looking at? And also, if you want to pitch it to someone who has played the previous games.
All right. Well, you're basically talking about the largest land campaign in history. So if you have an interest in that, and then you take a game that tries to resolve it down to the individual tank and plane and man, and so you get an immense amount of detail. So then the question is, well, how do you play this? Well, War in the East has the advantage of you can start small. You can start, as you mentioned, you start with the smaller scenarios. And then you build up to the grand campaign, of 200 turns, where literally each turn in the campaign is a game in itself. And it's really what it comes down to. And, you can push pieces around. And that's the nice thing. That was our goal with War in the East 1. That you could be simple. You could get into it quickly. You could have fun just moving pieces around, trying to make an encirclement here or there. Okay. But then, what you find is, so you've got that addictive quality that comes in with the game too. That you want to make the next attack, you want to make the next move, and so there's a big quality of that in the game as well. And basically, that it allows you to get into it easily, but there's so much depth that you keep finding you want to get into. Okay, well, what do what happens here? Why, if I do this, if I change this depot here, how does that change things? And so there's so many different layers in the game that you can play it at the surface level, you can play it at the deeper level. Now, War and the East 2 has even more in terms of ways to get at that information and the detail that's there. But it also gives you a few things like the AI, which is incredibly challenging, and we think Gary's best AI, that he's made in a game. But it's also there to help you at the beginning. So we have an AI assist for the air game and for the logistics game, which are two big parts of the game, to help you get into the game as a beginner and as you first step in. So if you're just new to war games or new to this kind of game, you can get into it. Hopefully, it is accessible, but you have to try not to learn everything all at once. You just can't. There's just too much going on. So you just play it, and we think it's enjoyable enough at that level. But then you're gonna find you want to find out more. And you're going to want to read up on the history, because that's going to actually help you in the game and understand why things are happening the way they are in the game, and why you're doing better now, because you suddenly realize some key point. So that's what I think is what makes it unique. It is a massive game, but it is equally as fun at the small scenario level as it is at the big campaign. But everybody wants to play the big campaign. Ultimately, that's what they go for.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know some of the first impressions we've heard in the past, from the historical standpoint, are just people, who open up the game, and it's like the entire Eastern Front in the box. They just look at it and they start browsing around, and their mind boggles, because if you want to keep drilling down, there's so much rich historical information. There are so many basically reference books, all distilled down into one easy to access view. And yeah, it's a war game, it's a strategy game, but at the same time, it's like an encyclopedia of the Eastern Front that's dynamic and it unfolds as you play. So yeah. I think there's this idea of sort of, you're there, the game brings the Eastern Front alive for you, and you can really see all the military aspects, the military challenges that the commanders were dealing with at that time. Now, since we started work on War and the East 2, it's been pretty clear to me that you guys really were taking it as a major effort. You weren't content to rest with your laurels with the original War in the East 1, that you decided to basically take another look at everything and all the feedback, all the ideas that had come up since War in the East 1 and through War in the West, that you were interested in going back and making it better in pretty much every way than its predecessors. So I'd like to get into some of those features specifically, some of which you mentioned briefly just now, but let's dig into the details. So first, I wanted to talk about the map. Now, I know that it is a more accurate map than War in the East map by quite a lot, based on a more accurate projection. It seems to perform better, and it also looks better than War in the West map, and better than War in the East map as far as weather is concerned. What do you feel the map changes from the original War in the East have added to War in the East 2?
Right. Well, there's some big ones like the double rail lines versus single rail lines. It sounds like a small thing, but it's actually a huge part of the the rail traffic and logistics was a huge part of the war. So we've got that in, and we've got a rail system. A road system in now as well. We used to, in War in the West, we went to we rated every hex as to whether it was a good quality roads or average or poor. And in War in the East, you actually, War in the East 2, you see these on the map. So, the very few good quality roads in the Eastern Front in the Soviet Union are very important, and they make a huge difference in the game. You have to pay attention to where the road network is. Even the average roads are going to be a huge difference, especially when you get to the mud season. And you mentioned weather. The integration, the weather system that Pavel worked on here is an extension of what he did in War in the West, which I challenge anybody to have a better weather system than what's in this game, as far as weather fronts coming in and the effects of the different kinds of weather. The mud, the heavy mud, and then the freeze over. where you suddenly can move again before you then get the heavy snow that kicks in, and the fact that the map is built graphically so that you can now actually see these different layers of weather on the map, and still read the map, read the text on the map, and the town names and so on. It makes it just a much more playable and usable map as well. And even John worked on the map. I think we've got some trees changing color over the seasons in the game. So you've got some touches in there like that. So.
And I'll say, touching on the logistics part that you mentioned, with the single and double rails and the influence of the roads, it's massive. I mean, War in the East 1 had a good supply system. War in the West improved on it, but War in the East 2 system, with this addition of the single and double rails, and the way that the depots and the rail capacity work and everything, I've found that it pretty much tracks exactly with what I've read, at least historically, about the challenges that they were dealing with logistically and where those challenges were the greatest. And boy, does it bring that home to you as you play.
Yeah, up until War in the East, up until and through War in the East, you had rails, and you had sort of a distance from the rail that you could be supplied. And that was, going back to the original War in the East board game, there was the old magic, 10 hexes from your rail lines. You were gods as German forces coming into the Soviet Union. And when you were 11 hexes away, if I remember right, you suddenly couldn't do anything. And that's not right. That's an abstraction, obviously, that's very clear. Love that game, though. And with War in the East, as I said, when we shelved the project in 2000, one of the problems was the computer wasn't capable of doing what we want to do with the rails. And even with War in the East 1, we had to simplify and stay fairly abstract. With War in the West, that was really the first time we were able to move to a more realistic logistical system. And we had to, because we had to deal with D-Day and the logistics of moving stuff onto the continent. So we dealt with that in War in the West. By the time we got to War in the East, thankfully, the computers have gotten stronger, and we were able to deal with double rail lines versus single rail lines.
Right.
And merge that with what we'd learned in War in the West. So this has been a project going from War in the East to War in the East 2. It's 10 years now, but with the stop of War in the West in between, and it's really allowed us to do a lot of things that we want to do. I mean, all games have abstractions to them, and you have to. And even in ours, there are abstractions. But the more we can drill down and get some of these key items, dealt with, I think the more fidelity we get to the history.
And I will say, as a player, if you keep track of some, important rules to follow, and you stick by those rules, the logistical system will do the rest. But if you want to drill down again and look into those details, and see the freight moving around and the trucks, bringing the supplies from the depots to the units, all that information is in there. And you can watch that happen and watch way too many of your trucks break down.
Yeah, sure.
All right, one other thing that we get a lot of the testers commenting on very positively versus War in the West and War in the East 1 is this new interplay, interaction, synergy, whatever you want to call it, between the movement and combat system, because of some of the changes that you've made with admin movement, preparation points, and combat delay. I wonder if you'd talk about those for a bit.
Sure. So we've been able to bring in some rules for combat preparation. For example, it gives you over time you build up combat prep, and it's basically more helpful to the attacker than a defender. So you have a way to build up for an offensive. I mean, that was a huge part of the Eastern Front activity. Was you'd have a build up to an offensive, and then you'd unleash the offensive, and it would go like gangbusters for a while, and then eventually it starts to peter out. So how do we get that? How do we avoid a Sitzkrieg situation? How do we give players the capability to get this? So with the logistics system, the combat prep, you have that ability to sort of, if you build up your forces right, you can release them. and get the dynamic effects of that. Admin movement is basically you can move around a lot faster in friendly territory in your rear area than you can when you're moving through enemy territory or freshly conquered territory. That's factored into the game now. So it combines with the road system to make it so you can really move quite easily in some areas, whereas before you wouldn't be able to do that. So that's a realistic part of the game. But it's all these things are automatically factored in for you. So as you're moving your units around, you're not having to remember all these rules. If you had to remember these rules, you cannot play this. This is not a game you could play as a board game. There's that much going on, but it's so easy with the computer, of course, to be able to do it. And that goes back 40 years now. What have we been trying to do with computer war games? Take the stuff that we love about board war games, put them on the computer, and then do things you couldn't do in a board game, and make them easy for you to do. So that's admin movement. Combat delay is basically the idea that in order to you have to punch a hole in the line, but it takes. You need to punch a hole quickly. You can't wait. It's a weekly turn. So if it takes you 6 days to punch a hole, you shouldn't be able to go through very far, and before the other player reacts. So combat delay is a factor of how we deal with that. So if you can overwhelm the defender, you could get a small combat delay. It basically simulates you're getting through there very quickly in the turn, and you can go through there and do your big enveloping movement. Otherwise, but if the defender, keeps it hard, makes it hard to get through that front line, then you won't be able to do it. So all these different mechanisms come in to give you a more realistic game.
I wanted to talk about a couple things you had touched on before. One of them you just did, which is we've put a lot of effort in War and Peace 2 into improving the interface and putting enough information at the player's fingertips. Like you said, you don't have to keep track of everything. The stuff that's most important to you, we try to put front and center. At the same time, if you want to drill down and use some of the really powerful tools like the commander's report or the metrics screen to see how things are going, all those are improved now. Do you want to touch on that at all, as far as how that helps a player?
Sure. Well, the commander's report is just so much improved for those who played War in the East 1 and used that. They knew it as a powerful tool for you to get information and occasionally to do, mass manipulation of your forces. You want to change your TO&E, your max TO&E percentage for your infantry divisions, a couple of clicks, boom, you've just changed 100 divisions, over to a different TO&E percentage. Well, this CR screen Pavel's done himself. It's even better. The filter capability on it, the ability to manipulate things with a few clicks and then mass change things is great.
This is one of the hidden secrets, that allows a player to play a game of this size and actually have it be a manageable task.
Right. Because when you're playing a small scenario, if you start with a tutorial and you only have 10 or 20 units, you can go to every individual unit detail screen and make the change right there. It's not a big deal. And you can still do that in the campaign. But let's face it, when you're dealing with, hundreds of units, thousands of units perhaps on the board, and you want to implement a change, you don't want to have to go to each one of those screens and do that. And so the CR screen really does give you a way to do that. And players who invest the time to look at that screen and use that screen, they're gonna be rewarded with huge time savings and the ability to do things they didn't realize they could do in the game.
So speaking of the interface, one of the other things that is interface related that we put a lot of effort into was how players access the air game and how they play with the air game. War in the East 1 had a relatively simple and straightforward air game. War in the West made it much more realistic to account for all the needs of the strategic air offensives. And now in War in the East 2, we've tried to give players what's effectively the best of both worlds. A simple, even automated way of managing your air on the map, but also all the detail and realism under the hood. So if you want to get into managing it in a more manual way, that you also can. And we're calling this the AOG system. And I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about what you think the AOG system is going to give players in War in the East 2, and what it's going to make possible versus War in the West and War in the East.
Sure. The AOG stands for Air Operational Group, and basically we created this system where you take a number of air units and put them together into a group, an AOG, which could be a division, let's say, or you can have a core AOG, and then you have the Army Command, Air Command, or Luftfloat AOG. So at each level, you've got an air operational group that's tied up the chain. So just like you have divisions and corps and armies and with the ground units. And the system we've implemented now has the air units. You can access the information on the map a lot easier than before, but it also integrates with air bases, actual air bases on the map, which War in the East 1 didn't have. War in the East 1 had a very simple abstract air system. You moved air headquarters around, and in the air headquarters you had the air units. So they just moved wherever you wanted them to. Air bases didn't exist. Well, that was unrealistic. That was an abstraction. In War in the West, we had to go to individual air bases. We wanted to go to individual air bases for that level of detail. Gary's, bombing the Reich series of games, and before that, USAF. He had a whole series of air games. So he knows air games, and we wanted that detail in War in the West because the Strategic Air Command, the Strategic Air Bombing campaign of Germany was a huge part of the Western Front. So on the Eastern Front, it's a little different. You have ground support is the main, function of the air armies in the Eastern Front. Although there was some industrial bombing, and there was certainly interdiction. It wasn't quite like the interdiction being done in Normandy and War in the West. But we wanted to bring that enhanced realistic air game over to War in the East. But we also knew we were dealing with thousands of planes. So we dealt with it in War in the West at some level, but we knew we could do more to make it easier to play with and for gamers to use. And so that's what the AOG system and the on-map AOGs basically give you that easier visibility, ease of use. And we've also tied in this AI Air Assist, which basically allows the starting player just to do some very simple things. And basically he can assign his air command to follow a front. And basically it will provide ground support for that front. You do have the ability to give a few detailed commands in there, but basically it's going to move your forces around, and it's going to assign the air missions and create the air directives for you. So you can start with that. Eventually you're going to want to learn more, and you're going to want to learn how to actually go in and create your own air directives. And instead of just saying, I want to do naval operation, I want the Luftfloat 1 to do naval operations off of Helene, let's say, to cut that off. You may want to go and actually create some air directives to do that. So you can get into that detail in the air system if you want, or you can stay back basically and let the AI assist do it for you. So again, it's many layers, and it is the fact that the Soviets had 15,000 plane air force by the end of the war, active air force and more in reserve, and that's a lot going on. So we had to make a system that would make it easier for the players to use. But the realism level there is much better than in War in the East 1, and you avoid the click fest, I think, that people saw in War in the East 1. With the way the system was operating, some people found ways to, if they managed to click a lot of times, they could find strategies to work, but it just shouldn't work.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize to players who haven't tried this out yet, if you're a big ground game fan, but you want to manage the air war at a higher level, really all you have to do is tell each of those AOGs, I want you to follow this army. I want you to do this basic type of, support, and move the army HQs, move the air HQs, and you're done. And it works pretty well. It really does. I've been playing around with it primarily in most of my testing, and it has really made it so that I don't have to micromanage the air game. So I think those players who are happy with that style of play, you're going to be quite happy with the AOC system.
Yeah, with that, I'd say with gamers, you find there's a lot of air gamers, a lot of ground gamers, a lot of naval gamers. It's hard to and there are some that just love to put them all together. But we want to make a game that basically can attract different players. So
yeah, it suits each play style. Yeah. And then as far as the AI assist, now you mentioned earlier about the AI assistance, and we just talked about how it can assist you in the air game. We've also talked about how it can assist you logistically in building your depots for you. But you mentioned earlier a claim that you thought this was the best AI Gary has ever made. I just want to chime in here and say I agree. I think this is an amazing AI, and it has absolutely given me fits time and time again. I worked with you on War in the East and War in the West, and I played, as part of working through these, I've played against the AI many times, and I've never had one of those AIs play as well as this one has been. I think for the casual gamer, there's going to be, a difficulty setting for them. For the experienced gamer, there's going to be a difficulty setting for them. And I think for even the best gamers, the best war gamers, the most experienced War in the East, War in the West players, I think they're going to find their initial bouts against the AI to be quite challenging, and for it to be a really very worthy opponent until they're ready to graduate to that human-to-human play.
I think players are going to have hundreds of hours easily against the AI that they'll feel like, okay, it's giving them a challenge. And as you said, you can crank up the difficulty level and basically make it harder if you want on yourself. But Gary spent a lot of time on the AI. I mean, that has been a big focus. So Gary's known for incredibly detailed combat results systems at the micro level, and how to take that and expand it to suit a macro situation. And he's known for AI. He's really one of the early and best AI creators that in war games, I think. And that's no easy task. Let me tell you, he spends a lot of time on that, and but he's got a lot of history making these kinds of games.
There's a couple more areas I want to cover before we wrap up. One has to do with what we're calling the theater boxes, and the other has to do with the new victory system for the Grand Campaign. I'm going to let you take those away.
Okay, sure. The theater boxes basically are for the off-map areas. So for the Axis, North Africa, the Balkans, Italy, Western Europe, those kinds of areas where basically we've got all the units operating there and actually fighting off-map and taking casualties and so on. And there's an event system that goes along with it that basically will track these campaigns and what's going on. And we have the game starts off with all the historical transfers of units, but you can also take, there's an option for enhanced theater box control. So basically you can take more control over moving units back and forth between various theaters that are off map and the on map. Plus you have a strategic reserve. Both sides have a strategic reserve box where they're moving units to rest and recuperate and so on. So it just, you don't just have the Eastern Front. You've got the whole war in Europe basically going on, and you can see that through the event system and the theater boxes. And for the Soviets, you've got the Far East as well, and the Transcaucasus, and then you've got the Northern Front in Finland. And we did make a decision in this case to go with theater boxes for the Finnish war. Although you'll see the map covers the whole area of Finland up to the Arctic Sea, but basically that area we decided would be just a bridge too far for us to try to factor that area, because it was just such a different war at a different scale. And we've talked about doing an expansion that has some Finnish scenarios. So we're hoping to do that in the future. But you do have the the theater box that deals with it. And if the Soviets take if the Germans take Leningrad, there are actually Finnish units and a Finnish Expeditionary Corps that can come on the map, so and participate in the on map activities. So you've got all that going on off map and around, and then you've got the victory system is different. We basically have a system where we track a German, what we call the high water mark. So if the Germans are scoring points by taking cities, by taking them early, quickly, they get bonus points. And then there's some points that are involved on from events and the other theaters of the war. Basically, all these go into a point total that the Axis are trying to get to a certain level of points in order to win the game automatically. And there's every quarter you track to see, okay, have you reached your automatic victory level? There's also a sudden loss level. So the Axis can't just sit back and, take Smolensk and say, okay, I'm digging in for the winner. Now you've got it. You're under some pressure to take certain amount of territory and do it quickly. And or else you'll lose the game outright. So let's assume you don't lose the game outright. Now you've got the high water mark, basically the most points that the Germans have reached. And that becomes important later on because there's a check later where the Soviets basically have to exceed the high water mark or they lose. And then eventually there's also auto victory system for the Soviets of gaining points. So there's an initiative change in the middle of the game. So the system tracks and decides based on how the victory points are going, when has the initiative changed from the Axis to the Soviets. And so it's totally different, and much more involved than what we had in War in the East. So,
and I like the way it works, where the better the Axis player, does earlier on, the higher a bar it sets. The Soviet player then has to do better later on.
Right, exactly. So we're trying to build in some tension in the game that maybe wasn't there before, to make the Axis player, try to move forward quickly and try to generate a high watermark, basically. Mm-hmm. And if they can do that will make it harder for the Soviets later on.
And it encourages the Soviet players also not withdraw too much early on and to really fight to slow down the capture of those victory cities.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So I know we're going to have multiple scenarios, go ranging from the tutorial scenario to a lot of the classic, road to Leningrad, road to Minsk. What used to be the idea was road to Kiev. Now it's the destruction of the Southwest Front. Covers a bit larger of a time scale and includes Guderian coming in, but that all then goes up to several large campaigns and the big grand campaign that goes all the way from the beginning of Operation Barbarossa to the very end of World War II in Berlin, probably. And so I just don't think personally, having played a lot of these games over the years and having played War in the East too now, I don't think there's ever been a game that's as historically accurate, as playable, and as enjoyably historical in its results as War in the East 2 is. If you want the entire Eastern Front, this is an entire Eastern Front simulator. And it does it with remarkable historical accuracy and fidelity. And for those that hold a special place in their hearts for War in the East, the original, which you should, still a great game. But I think, honestly, you'll find War in the East 2 is better in every respect. So I'm going to put you on the spot now and ask, when do you think War in the East 2 will be available for purchase?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? Well, we think we'll probably be ready in early spring. That's what we're.
All right. Well, that sounds good. And one last question for you, and this is sort of, do you have any words of wisdom to pass along segment? Looking back at all your experiences to date, if you were talking to a war game developer, designer who was just starting, thinking about making their first game or currently working on their first game, what advice would you give them?
I'd say it's in order to make a game these days, and for quite some time, it takes a big team of people. And so I would say be open to find people, find something you're passionate about. Then be open to find others who are passionate about the same thing and let them be part of that team, because we couldn't do this game Gary and Pavel are amazing designer programmers, but we couldn't do it without a big, large team of people who are as passionate about their parts of this game as we are. I mean, our order of battle, our Wikipedia, all kinds of pieces of this game are built by people who are as passionate about it as we are. And you really need to have that. So, you never know where you're going to get the next person who can, create an amazing system for you. And so just be open to that and jump at the chance when you see these people.
Thanks. I think that's great advice. Well, with War and These Two just around the corner, I think it's going to be a great start to 2021 for Wargamers. And I think it'll be, as with its predecessors, some of the best bang for the buck you can get in all of gaming. I think we've all lost count of how many hours we've put into the previous 2x3 games. It ends up truly being a bargain. And I'm sure we will be talking more about War and These Two in the next month or two, including some detailed feature previews, some after-action reports, and other promotional items. So if you're new to wargaming and you're not familiar with 2x3's games, hopefully this drew some interest and you'll give some of the other games a try. Joel, I want to thank you for being with us today. And I want to encourage everyone, give some of these all-time great games, put them on your computer, give them a playthrough.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Joel, for the time and for all this very good information. Always great to see you on screen. We don't see you very often, so it's almost like an achievement that you've got me on screen for an interview. That's really good. Eric, before we go to a final closing word, is there anything you want to say about this set of 4 games that you think we've missed?
I think the main thing I'd like to reemphasize is that it's not every year that we get a crop of war games this good that are in the pipeline, and that no matter what your interest as a wargamer, I think at least one of these games is going to scratch your itch and probably go down as one of your all-time favorites. If you're a wargamer with fairly broad tastes, I think you're going to love all 4 of them. So I'm really excited about what 2021 means for wargamers, and it's great to see some of these that have been in development for a while coming to fruition at the same time. I think it's going to be a great year and a wonderful bookend to what has been a tough 2020.
Yeah, I think one of the things you were saying earlier on to me was because you work so hard on existing, projects that you basically take care of, you don't really have much time to play anything else these days, and it was a good opportunity for you to play DC4 and then WarPlan. I think going out and playing something different sometimes is also helping creativity for other projects, right?
It's true, and it was a genuine pleasure this year to get up to speed on these war games and to basically come out of my own project bubble. Sometimes, when you work on games, you get a little bit blind, to what they look like from the outside, and things become so familiar that you lose sight of what it's like to see them for the first time. Whereas being able to jump into WarPlan and DC4 and see them with those fresh eyes, for the first time, I think I can say with confidence with all these that you're going to love them. Good.
And Eric, you're on screen. There's probably going to be a few people out there wanting me to ask this question. Although we're recording this, I can almost like see that happening in a chat. And they know you're on Distant Worlds too. So is there anything you can tell us that's to give us a bit of information about Distant Worlds 2 now?
Yeah, to be fair, I've been hearing those questions in my mind as well. I know that's going on. It's one of those games that also has a pretty big crossover following among wargamers. So Distant Worlds 2 has been consuming a large part of my life in recent years. And we've been putting our hearts and souls, Elliot and I, into making it the best game we possibly can. We had originally hoped to release in 2020, but, and when something's not quite done, you don't take it out of the oven. So we're baking it a little bit longer. And I'm happy to say that while we are previewing these war games for 2021 in this particular stream, we are going to have another big preview coming in January, which is going to include Distant Worlds 2. We were originally planning for that maybe as a December preview as well, but with a lot of the big console and other releases coming out, the noise created around Christmas, we decided it was better to reveal in January. But I've also got some other big news, which is, we've been in alpha on Distant Worlds 2 for several months now, and that has helped us work out a lot of issues and has helped us inch each month closer to the finish line. And I'm glad to say that we are going to be entering beta in January. So a lot of the folks who may have been waiting for a spot on the beta team, January is not so far away. You will have your chance, and you will get a chance to take a peek if you help us out with the testing at what Distant Worlds 2 is going to be coming your way. And if you're not up for testing, just stay tuned for the stream. We're going to be showing more of the game than we've ever shown before, including actual gameplay footage and some of the final graphics and effects. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And Distant Worlds 2 is going to be a 2021 release.
All right. Well, that was a hell of a tease. Thank you very much for the information. Eric, thanks for joining us in the stream today. I am excited about next year. There's a lot of war games coming up. There's a lot of other things that we haven't announced that are coming up as well. It's going to be a tremendous year for strategy games in general. I'm looking forward to saying goodbye to 2020 for all good reasons, but also because 2021 is going to be an exciting, fascinating, I guess for Slytherin Matrix, a life-changing year in terms of releases, products, and new events. So thank you very much.
I couldn't agree more, Marco. It's going to be a great year for everyone, and I wish everyone a safe journey to 2021.
And happy Christmas and a happy holiday, and we'll see you soon in January. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.